Chapter 21. Shi Feng's eyes went cold. Whoever dares to plot against me will pay back 100-fold. He stared down at the young man sprawled on the ground before him. If you won't speak, I'll simply make you. The wounded youth's face twisted in panic as Shi Feng's features shifted. His irises darkened to pitch black, and two gleaming fangs slid into place. With a silent snarl, he advanced. What are you going to do? The young man stammered, backing away until his spine hit the cold earth. Despite his usual detachment, the boy was consumed by terror now, fear for his life, fear of the unknown monster before him. Shi Feng said nothing. He lifted his head, his jaws parting, and bit into the man's neck. Chapter 17. The Boy Genius Assassin. It was the first time Shi Feng had ever bitten a living person, but he had no choice. To uncover who was trying to kill him, he needed information, and his corpse poison was the perfect tool. Not only was it lethally fast, but it could transform its victim into a puppet utterly obedient to his will. He'd already tested it on the little black sparrow that scouted the city walls, though that bird had been only a low-level corpse puppet. What he was attempting now carried risks, but it was the only way to flush out the traitor hidden in the shadows. Shi Feng had never fed on human blood before, but he carried the ancestral memories of a former generation of the undead. He knew that once he turned someone into a zombie, the ritualistic suppression of his blood rank granted him a measure of control, provided his victim's strength didn't far outstrip his own. Still, plunging his fangs into a living boy was an entirely different experience. His sharp canines sliced through soft skin and severed an artery. A shockwave of sensation rippled through Shi Feng's soul, as though something ancient and forbidden had awakened within him. He remembered the sweet thrill of tasting poultry blood once, but this hot, arterial rush was beyond anything he had imagined. The metallic tang filled his nostrils, intoxicating him like ambrosia. Unable to resist, he sank his mouth deeper and drank in great, hungry gulps, letting the scarlet fluid roll down his throat into his stomach. It burned and bloomed within him like a potent elixir, every vein alive with fire, every nerve singing in ecstasy. Then, in the midst of his blood-soaked reverie, Shi Feng suddenly halted, the frenzy of the moment vanishing as swiftly as it had come. He stared at the boy in his arms, mind clearing in an instant, and for the first time he truly understood the dark power he wielded. Shi Feng felt a sudden rush of memories flood his mind, all of them belonging to the very young man before him. From earliest childhood through every trial of adolescence, the boy's life history streamed into Shi Feng's consciousness via the tainted blood on his lips. He blinked and shook his head as if waking from a trance. Only then did he realize how long he'd been holding the boy's mouth shut. Releasing him, Shi Feng watched the youth's eyes go wide with horror, his face draining to an ashen gray. The anger that had flared so fiercely in the boy's veins was already ebbing away. Shi Feng stiffened. He had come within a breath of killing him, and if he had, the boy would have risen again as a mindless zombie, nothing more than a shambling corpse. That was the one outcome he dared not allow. Better, then, that the boy still lived, because as long as Shi Feng's corpse poison continued its insidious work on the boy's soul, the youth would slowly transform into a zombie, one endowed with his own cunning and will. Provided the boy's natural strength did not far exceed Shi Feng's, he would be able to seize complete control. That psychic domination would burrow ever deeper into the boy's spirit, until escape became impossible. The memories had finished pouring in. Shi Feng now held every secret the boy had ever known. And there was one crucial truth. The boy had not been lying. He genuinely had no idea who his mysterious employer was. Shi Feng could only hope that once the boy became a zombie, he'd be able to control him, and use him to uncover who was really pulling the strings. With that in mind, Shi Feng released the boy from his zombie state and rose to his feet. A sudden sensation prickled at Shi Feng's senses. He turned toward Holy Soul Village and spotted a small head peeking out from behind a large tree 100 meters away. The moment the child realized he'd been seen, the head ducked out of sight. Shi Feng stepped forward, intent on identifying who it was, but before he could close the distance, the figure bolted from behind the tree and sprinted off toward the village. Shi Feng froze. He knew that gait, that build. It was Tang San. A wry smile tugged at his lips. Tang San had just witnessed him drinking blood. After that, he'd surely treat Shi Feng like a monster and never come near him again. Shi Feng shook his head, turned back to the boy, and settled down beside him, waiting quietly. Shi Feng pressed a palm to his chest, feeling the faint echo of pain where the blade had pierced him. Moments ago, he'd believed his heart irreparably wounded, yet the city's advanced soul-healing protocols had already repaired him. Around him, the shambling corpses known as zombies writhed on the factory floor, stubborn foes that could only be slain through specialized soul restraints. He took a steadying breath and delved into the boy's memories. What he found was tragic. The boy's name was Jing Wuming. At age 3, he'd been the last heir of a minor sect, only to watch his entire family massacred and his home eradicated. Left an orphan, he had been taken in by the enigmatic assassin Jing Wuchang, who raised him from 6 years old in the art of killing. Now, at 10, Jing Wuming's soul power already ranked at level 19, an extraordinary feat for someone so young. But the true shock lay in his martial souls. He possessed not one, but two. His primary spirit was the shadow spirit, his secondary, a sword spirit. With the shadow spirit's first skill, he could merge with any darkness, rendering himself invisible. Of course, that was why Shi Feng had searched every corner of the factory in vain. No wonder the boy had eluded him. As he pondered this, Shi Feng's gaze flicked to the far corner, where the dim light barely reached. There, pressed against a support beam, a slight figure melted into the gloom. Jing Wuming's outline was still, his breath slow and controlled. Shi Feng closed the gap in 3 steps. He raised a hand to summon a veil of faint azure light, just enough to coax the boy from hiding without alarming the nearby zombies. "You can come out," he said quietly. "I know you're there." Footsteps, a faint scuff, and then from the shadows, Jing Wuming emerged, his yellow eyes calm but wary, his slender form draped in the silent confidence of a seasoned killer. Shi Feng offered a reassuring nod. "Your secret's safe with me. Now, let's finish this fight, together." In that instant, Hunter and Prodigy stood side by side, ready to unleash shadow and steel against the encroaching horde. "This martial soul is truly peculiar," Shi Feng mused, eyes narrowing. "It can vanish into any shadow, no matter how faint." He glanced at the soul aura reading floating before him. Jing Wuming's current soul power level was 19, and at the moment of his awakening, he had already manifested an innate soul power of level 8, an extraordinary feat by any standard. Most awakenings hovered around levels 1 or 2. Level 8 was the mark of a prodigy. Shi Feng's heart raced. A soul power of 8, combined with Jing Wuming's rare twin martial souls, placed him almost on par with the legendary Tang San. If Shi Feng could bring such a talent under his influence, he would gain a formidable ally. Better still, Jing Wuming's adoptive father was none other than the head of the notorious assassin organization in Notting City. Control Jing Wuming, and by extension his father's network, and Shi Feng would hold the reins of one of the city's most feared clandestine powers. As Shi Feng weighed the possibilities, Jing Wuming, unaware of his own value to Shi Feng, still viewed the assassin clan only as a looming titan, though he had no clear sense of its true scale. Roughly 10 minutes later, Shi Feng felt it, a subtle, inexplicable tether forming between his consciousness and Jing Wuming's. A strange, electric thrill pulsed through him, as if a door had creaked open deep within their souls, linking them. Elation flooded Shi Feng's chest. This bond was proof that fate was already aligning in his favor. Shi Feng watched in quiet awe as the wounds on Jing Wuming's stomach and the puncture marks on his neck began to close right before his eyes. Flesh knit itself back together, the scars fading until his skin lay smooth and unmarked. Jing Wuming blinked, stunned, confusion flickering in his gaze. A moment later, clarity returned to his features, and he carefully pushed himself to his feet. He studied Shi Feng with a tumult of emotions, gratitude, surprise, even a hint of fear, before setting them aside. With steady resolve, Jing Wuming knelt on one knee and bowed his head. "Master." From that instant, his will was bound to Shi Feng's, his loyalty forged so deeply into his soul that he would follow any command without question, even if it meant laying down his life. Page 22. "Before Wuming's offense against me goes unpunished, deal with him," Shi Feng said calmly. Jing Wuming bowed so low it was nearly a knee strike. Yes, master. Shi Feng offered him a hand. You're one of us now. There's no need for such formality. With a gentle smile, he helped Jing Wuming to his feet. Jing Wuming stood, still radiating deference as he waited for instructions. Though his mind raced, an instinctive obedience to Shi Feng grounded him, as if he'd always belonged by the young master's side. Shi Feng sensed it too, and when he was certain it was genuine, he gave his first order. I need you to find out who's plotting to kill me, quickly. At once, master. Jing Wuming bowed again. He hesitated for a moment, then asked quietly, Master, I saw in your memories that you planned to add a soul ring to your second martial soul. Is that still your intention? Jing Wuming didn't feign surprise that Shi Feng knew his thoughts. He simply nodded. Shi Feng shook his head. Not yet. Don't rush to add any more soul rings to your secondary martial soul. Jing Wuming blinked. Master, please explain. The shadow martial soul alone will carry you, for now, Shi Feng said firmly. When you advance to Contra or even title Douluo, then you may take a new ring for your sword. Chapter 18, Confronting Tang San. At that stage, the spirit ring you can bear will be over 10,000 years old, perhaps even older, Shi Feng explained. Jing Wuming's eyes gleamed, and he dropped to one knee in reverence. Thank you for your guidance, master. He hesitated for a moment, then added, But master, my offensive strength depends almost entirely on my sword spirit. Without an additional spirit ring, won't my power suffer greatly? Shi Feng gave him a knowing smile. Just tune into your body and feel what's changed. Closing his eyes, Jing Wuming carefully probed his inner energy. After a few breaths, he opened them in astonishment. Master, my soul power has actually broken through to level. Every aspect of my physique feels enhanced. My strength has more than doubled. Despite his calm training, the young assassin couldn't hide his excitement. Shi Feng nodded approvingly. That surge of power is the ability I granted you. And there's more. Do you remember the special poison I once showed you? Shi Feng's expression grew serious as he regarded Jing Wuming. There's something else you need to understand, he said quietly. The poison now coursing through your veins will only strengthen as your cultivation advances. It's a dangerous side of your power, but there is a benefit. Even without a spirit ring, your sword spirit will be able to display tremendous might. Only then did Jing Wuming grasp the full meaning of Shi Feng's words, and a deep sense of gratitude swelled within him. Before he could voice his thanks, Shi Feng continued, his tone grave. Every gift has its price, Shi Feng warned. After a while, you'll develop an insatiable thirst for blood. You'll have to feed on it just to stave off unbearable pain. When that happens, you won't be entirely human anymore. You'll become a blood-drinking monster, able to survive only by draining life from others. Horror washed over Jing Wuming at the thought of such a fate. Yet despite the fear gripping his heart, his resolve did not falter. He bowed deeply to Shi Feng, silently vowing to accept both the incredible power he had been given and its terrible cost. Shi Feng's voice was calm but firm as he addressed his companion. From now on, you may draw on human or animal blood when you need to feed, but under no circumstances are you to bite a living person unless I explicitly order you to. He paused for a moment, watching Jing Wuming's eyes. Shi Feng understood all too well the catastrophe a zombie plague would unleash. If the virus ever broke free on Douluo continent, it would spell doom not only for the land's inhabitants, but ultimately for himself. Before he grew strong enough to contain such a threat, the last thing he wanted was to see frantic mobs hunting down the undead and turning on him as their creator. Though Jing Wuming didn't fully grasp the gravity behind Shi Feng's words, the command had sunk deep into his soul. He would never bite another living being unless ordered, an oath he vowed to uphold until the day he died. Shi Feng allowed himself a wry smile. Watching the obedient figure before him, he entertained a dangerous daydream. What if, one day, he raised an army of the undead to enforce his will? The very thought was chilling, and he dismissed it immediately. Such extremes would only be born of desperation, and Shi Feng was determined not to give in to despair. As he turned away, he couldn't help but think, I might just be the kindest zombie master in history. Shi Feng's eyes went cold. When you get back, tell everyone I'm dead, then quietly find out who's trying to kill me. Jing Wuming bowed once. Master, shall I eliminate them? No, Shi Feng replied, shaking his head. Just uncover the truth. I'll take it from there. At his command, Jing Wuming vanished in a flash. Shi Feng abandoned his fishing spot and turned back toward Holy Soul Village, a pounding headache reminding him how little time he had and how awkward his explanation to Tang San would be. He retraced his steps until the familiar rooftops of the village came into view. Outside Tang San's house, he caught sight of a figure darting inside, the door slamming shut so hard the whole wall seemed to vibrate. Shi Feng shook his head in exasperation. Tang San, you've mastered so many unique arts, and yet you're terrified of a zombie like me? He forced down a rueful chuckle. Of course, Tang San knew how to detoxify corpses, but commanding the undead was a whole different matter. Perhaps a little fear was only natural. Tang San was afraid Shi Feng might lose control and lash out at his father, Tang Hao. Shi Feng shook his head in frustration and turned toward the house. He was in no mood to train. A few steps later, Tang San's voice stopped him. Wait, Tang San called, rushing forward, his eyes wide with worry. Shi Feng, we need to talk, just the two of us. Shi Feng sighed but nodded. Okay, where do you want to go? Tang San's finger traced a line up the distant slope. Let's take this to the summit, he said. Shi Feng gave a curt nod. He'd been waiting for Tang San to speak first, and now was as good a moment as any. They ascended in silence, the air growing thinner with every step. At last they stood on the bare, wind-lashed peak. Their robes snapped like banners in a storm. Shi Feng and Tang San faced one another, breaths visible in the cold air, each unmoving and unreadable, two statues carved from the same granite. Tang San's eyes glinted with resolve. He'd armed himself with dozens of steel needles, poised to strike at the slightest provocation. By the tenets of the Xuantian treasure record, a confirmed foe must be dealt with swiftly, no quarter given. He would never forgive Shi Feng if he harmed his father or old Jack. Though his heart thundered with both fear and righteous fury, Tang San lifted his chin and met Shi Feng's gaze without flinching. After a tense moment, Tang San's voice cut through the wind. Why did you bite him? Shi Feng watched him warily, noting the eagerness in Tang San's stance. For a heartbeat, he felt strangely helpless. Then he squared his shoulders and prepared to answer. Tell me, Shi Feng said, locking eyes with Tang San, if I told you that you're the one who wants to kill me, would you believe me? Tang San's lips curved into a condescending smirk. He shook his head slowly, as if humoring a child. You expect me to believe that some adolescent has it out for a 6-year-old? What kind of joke is this? Shi Feng's shoulders slumped in frustration. I'm serious, he insisted, but it seems you'd rather accuse me of lying. Tang San's smile vanished. His eyes went cold. Then you'd better explain yourself, right now, or forget about ever leaving this mountain alive. I've already told you, I won't harm anyone. Shi Feng's voice was calm, almost weary. He refused to reveal that he'd narrowly escaped an assassin's blade. There was no proof, and Tang San would never trust such a story. No, the only way to clear this up was to let time prove him innocent. As Shi Feng turned to leave, Tang San sprang in front of him. Don't think you can just walk away, he snarled, grabbing Shi Feng's shoulder. Without missing a beat, Shi Feng quietly unleashed a pulse of soul power through his arm. Tang San's fingers splayed and relinquished their grip, startled by the power behind the motion. Shi Feng didn't look back as he descended the mountain path, determined to show, by his actions rather than words, that he meant no harm to old Jack. Shi Feng had only taken 2 steps forward when Tang San struck again. This time, he summoned the power of Xuanyu's palm technique, planting a solid blow on Shi Feng's shoulder. Explain yourself, or stay here, Tang San warned, intent on trapping him until he'd given a satisfying answer. Tang San knew Shi Feng was no ordinary opponent, so he channeled soul force through that strike. The blow rocked Shi Feng off balance, and for a moment he swayed, almost dropping to his knees. A clay figurine might still seethe with anger, but even Shi Feng, renowned for his calm, found Tang San's persistence intolerable. He spun around, eyes flashing. You looking for a fight? Save your words, and don't even think about leaving, Tang San replied coldly. You've already decided I bit that boy on purpose. What use is an explanation now? Tang San fell silent, realizing with a jolt that, deep down, he'd already convinced himself of Shi Feng's guilt. Chapter 19. Shi Feng's Trial by Combat. Someone wants to kill Shi Feng? Tang San shook his head in disbelief. That's absurd. Even you don't believe it. Shi Feng caught a flash of doubt in Tang San's eyes, and that only fueled his own suspicions. He took a step closer, voice cool but firm. So if I'm not mistaken, you want to see me dead? Tang San's expression flickered. He'd not expected Shi Feng to put it so bluntly, but in truth, he had toyed with the idea. The two had been sizing each other up for some time now, and today, Shi Feng's dark mood pushed Tang San to prove his strength. Fine, Tang San said at last. Let's see what you've got. Before Shi Feng could react, Tang San's aura surged, and he lunged forward, unleashed. Shi Feng's eyes narrowed. He'd been itching for a test of Tang San's prowess himself. The first impact came like a thunderclap. Tang San channeled his spirit power into a devastating punch, his Xuanyu-infused gauntlet gleaming with pale violet light. Shi Feng braced himself. Though the Xuanyu fist could neutralize most toxins and guard against Shi Feng's infamous corpse poison, it couldn't stop raw force. Their collision sent shockwaves rippling through the training courtyard. Tang San rocketed backward, flipped twice in midair, and skidded across the ground before recovering his stance. Shi Feng planted his feet and watched, unhurried, a faint smirk curving his lips. Tang San shook off the dirt, glaring fiercely. He knew he was outmatched, and yet excitement burned in his eyes. This was no routine sparring match. It was a decisive trial. Only one of them would walk away unscathed, and both were determined to win. Shi Feng's strike landed with such force that Tang San staggered back, his palm tingling from the impact. He blinked, genuinely impressed. What raw power, Tang San breathed, more to himself than to Shi Feng. He'd heard tales of Shi Feng's strength, observed it from afar, but feeling it up close was a different matter entirely. Wiping the numbness from his hand, Tang San squared his shoulders and met Shi Feng's gaze with calm resolve. I'll give you this. Your strength is impressive. But strength alone means nothing. Without proper technique, no matter how powerful you are, you're just a blunt instrument. Shi Feng's expression darkened. He recalled Tang San's repertoire. The haunting Ziji demon eye, the swift and silent Xuanyu hand, the phantom shadow mistrak, and an array of concealed weapons. In every facet of combat except raw power, he knew himself to be outclassed. He'd never faced an adversary who so effortlessly combined skill with speed. Before Shi Feng could gather his wits, Tang San moved. He stepped onto a ripple of shadow beneath his feet, and in the blink of an eye, he became a dozen indistinct afterimages, each flickering around Shi Feng like restless ghosts. Disoriented, Shi Feng barely had time to lift a guard before Tang San's foot struck his side, sending him crashing to the ground. Tang San stood over him, unwavering and composed. Brute strength can win you a fight, he said quietly, but it won't make you a true warrior. Shi Feng reacted in the nick of time, shooting his arm forward to block Tang San's strike. But before he could counterattack, Tang San had already blurred out of sight. The next thing Shi Feng knew, he was absorbing blow after blow, fists crashing into his ribs, kicks rattling his sides. Yet none of them carried Tang San's true power. It was maddening. He knew he wasn't slow, his own footwork was solid, but it simply couldn't match Tang San's uncanny footwork and unpredictable feints. Every time Shi Feng shifted his weight to meet an incoming blow, Tang San would vanish in a streak of motion and reappear behind or to the side, landing another hit before Shi Feng could even spin back around. Shi Feng let out a furious roar and lunged forward, hoping to land even a glancing blow. But Tang San danced away with effortless grace, always just out of reach. Shi Feng's gauntlet struck air. Again and again he surged, only to find himself parried by nothing. Not a weapon, not a fist, not even the hem of Tang San's robes. Panting, Shi Feng realized the harsh truth. He was being toyed with. The moment he committed to an attack, Tang San would simply dissolve into motion and reassemble elsewhere. Straining every muscle, Shi Feng braced himself. He wouldn't let this go on forever. Next time, he would find a way to pin down his elusive opponent, no matter the cost. 10 minutes later, Shi Feng was completely plastered with footprints. He was exhausted, and he was fed up. No matter how bizarre Tang San's tricks became, he simply had no strength left to resist. He couldn't unleash his power, nor could he outrun Tang San's lightning-fast strikes. The sheer humiliation of being toyed with was almost unbearable. Panting, he glared at his own system interface and muttered, "Everyone else's golden fingers are so flashy and game-changing. Mine, I have to literally be struck by lightning to get a single bonus." At that moment, Tang San finally halted. The thought of ending Shi Feng's life had only been a fleeting impulse. He truly didn't want to kill him. After all, in all the years he'd observed Shi Feng, he'd never once seen him launch an unprovoked attack. Tilting his head, Tang San studied Shi Feng, curiosity replacing his earlier aggression. "Are you saying that boy was actually trying to kill you?" Shi Feng met his gaze, shoulders sinking in resignation. "Absolutely. And if I'm lying?" He let the sentence hang in the air, daring the heavens to strike him down if it wasn't true. Shi Feng watched Tang San's retreating figure with narrowed eyes. "That boy's been under my control ever since I bit him," he called out. "If you don't believe me, wait a few days. I'll have him come to prove it." Tang San stopped in his tracks and turned, his expression tightening. He didn't know whether Shi Feng's zombie spirit functioned the same way Tang San's old one had. After a moment's hesitation, he asked, "So anyone you bite turns into a zombie?" Shi Feng nodded once, curtly. "Yes, but he's already bound to me. Without my command, he wouldn't dare bite a soul." Tang San's gaze darkened. "Let's drop it for now, but mark my words, if you ever harm Grandpa Jack, I'll never forgive you." With that, he turned and strode down the mountainside, leaving Shi Feng alone at the peak. Shi Feng rubbed his forehead irritably. "Stingy system," he muttered to the air. "Why won't you grant me any martial techniques? Not even the most basic fist style. Am I cursed?" He bent to pick up a small stone, flung it at a nearby tree, then clenched his fist in frustration. His innate spirit power was maxed out. His zombie spirit was strong enough to rival most opponents. He had come here confident he could defeat Tang San, and yet he'd been brushed aside without so much as a scratch. A fierce surge of impatience welled up in him. The God-bestowed spirit ring he'd seen earlier, he needed it. Now. Shi Feng brushed dust from his cultivator's robes and forced down the rage burning inside him. He'd wanted for a moment to unleash a new skill, one that might have turned his defeat into victory and left Tang San battered on the ground. But impulse would have been suicide. His life was too precious to risk. Stepping back, he scanned himself for injuries. There were none. Tang San's blade had, predictably, been held in check, bruising the air more than flesh. Even if Tang San had unleashed everything he had, it was unlikely he could have seriously harmed Shi Feng. After all, it was Jing Wuming's enchanted sword that once pierced straight through his heart, and yet here he stood, very much alive. With a frustrated roar, Shi Feng let loose a single kick on a nearby boulder. The stone shattered under his foot, sending fragments skittering across the cavern floor. When he calmed himself, he closed his eyes and reached out with his spirit sense to contact Jing Wuming. Through that bond, he learned that Jing Wuming had already returned to Notting City. As one of the young masters in the city's assassin guild, Jing Wuming would waste no time investigating who had orchestrated the attack, and more pressingly, who had slaughtered Shi Feng's employer. Shi Feng's eyes snapped open. Justice would come, one way or another. But first, he needed to grow stronger and absorb the spirit ring he'd just claimed. Only then could he take real vengeance on Tang San. That same morning, far from the rocky cavern, Notting City's Wuhan Hall was alive with activity. In the hall's grand east wing, Matthew Nuo, the venerable grandmaster of the Soul Martial sect, beckoned Su Yuntao into his private study. "Master Su," Matthew greeted, his tone polite but unmistakably urgent, "I have news that demands your immediate attention." As Su Yuntao stepped across the threshold, he felt the weight of an impending storm, one that would soon engulf every cultivator in Notting City. Shi Yuntao burst into Master Nuo's office, his heart pounding. He'd just received word that Shi Feng had been killed, and he needed to tell someone, anyone, right away. To his surprise, Master Nuo was already inside with Cece. The moment Cece looked up, her cheeks flushed pink and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. A faint, familiar scent clung to her, and Shi Yuntao's senses, sharp as a wolf's, quivered with recognition, though he couldn't quite place it. "Master Nuo, Cece," he blurted. "Why are you here? I've been searching everywhere." Cece offered a gentle smile. "I was in Holy Soul Village, carrying out the assignment you gave me this morning," she explained. "That's why you didn't see me." Shi Yintao glanced at Master Nuo. What assignment? He asked. But Master Nuo's expression was too grave. He took a steadying breath and said, Tao, I have terrible news about Shi Feng. Shi Yintao's pulse skipped. What? What happened to Shi Feng? He's dead. The words struck like thunder. Master Nuo's voice broke with regret, and Shi Yintao felt the ground shift beneath him. His vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. With Shi Feng gone, all hope of promotion had vanished in an instant. Su Yintao's eyes filled with tears. In a sudden rush of grief, he grabbed Ma Xunuo's shoulders and shook him violently. Tell me, he choked out, how did he die? Ma Xunuo bowed his head warily. He went downriver to fish and drowned. Such a prodigy. It's heartbreaking. Su Yintao's grip slackened, and he collapsed across the wooden table, burying his face in his arms as silent sobs shook his body. After years at the Wuhun Hall, awakening thousands of children and finally poised to reach the pinnacle of his craft, he had nothing left but failure. Cece stepped forward, gently patting his back. Don't lose hope, she whispered. I saw with my own eyes that Shi Feng's body was laid to rest underground. You will awaken even greater talents in time. Su Yintao flinched away from her touch, rose unsteadily, and stumbled out of the hall, his mind clouded by grief. He needed wine to numb the pain. Chapter 20. Commencing Spirit Ring Absorption. Shi Feng trudged home in a daze, skipping his afternoon appointment at Tang Hao's forge. That morning, Tang San had beaten him and forced him to lick the floor at gunpoint. Shi Feng still burned with shame. He vowed he would not show his face again until Tang San offered a sincere apology. Shi Feng skipped his usual blacksmithing drills that afternoon and grabbed the heavy stone roller instead. This time, he shouldered the weight and tore up the mountain path on foot, then thundered back down, pushing himself far harder than before. Ever since Tang San had bested him in their last spar, his craving for raw power had grown insatiable. Midway through his grueling climb, a familiar voice echoed in his mind, Jing Wuming, speaking through their soul link. Good news, Jing Wuming announced. Our quarry has been located at the Wuhun Temple. Shi Feng allowed himself a brief pause on a rocky outcrop, wiping sweat from his brow. The information was a breakthrough, but it had come at a cost. Even with Jing Wuming's lofty rank, uncovering who had bribed officials in that scandalous incident was proving maddeningly difficult. Sensitive files were locked tight behind layers of privilege to which neither of them had access. He shoved the stone roller aside and took a deep breath, letting the mountain air clear his thoughts. If they were going to expose the corruption behind the crime, Shi Feng knew he'd need more than brute strength. He'd have to outthink the hidden hands manipulating every official record. But first, he had to reach Wuhun Temple, and he would be ready. It was already a major breakthrough that the Wuhun Temple had put a price on my head. Yet why would they move against me now? I've never crossed them. In fact, I haven't rejected their overtures. They should still be trying to recruit me, not assassinate me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the Wuhun Temple's usual approach. Then I remembered Su Yintao, the very man who helped me awaken my martial soul. If anyone knew why the temple had turned on me, it would be him. I dispatched a message to Jing Wuming, ordering him to dig into Su Yintao's recent activities. 2 days later, Jing Wuming reported new targets, Ma Xunuo and Cece. At first, I drew a blank. These two were minor players in the original tale. Ma Xunuo was the woman Su Yintao once courted, and Cece, an elderly master at the Nodding City Wuhun Temple. Neither had any obvious reason to want me dead. Another day passed before Jing Wuming finally uncovered the truth and revealed exactly why Ma Xunuo and Cece were so intent on my demise. Chapter 7. The Confrontation by the Riverside. Just before dawn, Shi Feng summoned his master, Jing Wuming, to Holy Soul Village. They met on the riverbank, a thin mist drifting over the water. Shi Feng folded his arms. Master, I need to know the whole truth. Why is Mateo Ro plotting against me? And what about Cece? Jing Wuming's expression was grave. Su Yintao's been drinking heavily, trying to drown his guilt. I fed him a story, told him you'd leaked information to Mateo Ro with the intent of delivering it to the papal court. Thinking he'd betrayed you, Mateo Ro reached out to our organization and commissioned your assassination. Shi Feng frowned. But why would Mateo Ro want me dead? Jing Wuming hesitated, flushing slightly. Shi Feng watched him expectantly. At my request, I used my soul-sealing technique to slip into Mateo Ro's private study, Jing Wuming admitted. I lay hidden there for an entire day and night. What I discovered was shocking. He cleared his throat. Mateo Ro and CC have been intimately involved. They've been carrying on in secret. Jing Wuming's cheeks went a deeper shade of red as he recalled the scene. I nearly exposed myself when they, He trailed off, embarrassed. Shi Feng let the silence stretch for a moment, then nodded slowly. So Mateo Ro feared you might expose their affair. To protect himself, and CC, he decided to eliminate the threat, which he assumed was you. Jing Wuming sighed. Exactly, and with Su Yuntao convinced of your betrayal, the plan gained momentum. Shi Feng gazed at the rippling water, determination settling on his features. Then we'll turn their own fears against them. It's time Mateo Ro understood just how dangerous I can be. He stepped onto the wooden pier, the first gray light of morning glinting off his blade. Jing Wuming fell into step beside him, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Shi Feng felt the ground shift beneath him. His jaw dropped so far it might never return. 80-year-old Ma Xunuo and CC, a barely 20-something beauty, had been secretly involved for over a month. An age gap wide enough to span 3 generations, and they'd kept it hidden. Meanwhile, Su Yuntao, who'd been pining after CC for ages, hadn't even suspected a thing. He'd been completely blind to it. How long have they been seeing each other? Shi Feng demanded, astonishment giving way to morbid curiosity. More than a month, Jing Wuming admitted. Shi Feng's brow furrowed. And Su Yuntao, does he know? Not at all, Wuming replied. They've kept him in the dark every step of the way. Shi Feng let out a hollow laugh. That's some twisted drama. But tell me, why did they try to kill me? Jing Wuming steadied his voice and laid out the truth. Ma Xunuo and CC had struck a bargain to assassinate Shi Feng so that Ma Xunuo could claim the title of Palace Master of Nodding City. Only then did Shi Feng understand their motive. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Poor Su Yunt. Ow, he really got played. Master, Wuming ventured hesitantly, shall I eliminate them? Shi Feng's eyes cooled to a steely blue. No, he said softly. Simply killing them would be far too ordinary. Wouldn't it be better to destroy their reputation and leave them with nothing? Jing Wuming mused, his eyes glinting. Shi Feng nodded. Follow me to the Holy Soul Village. There's someone you need to meet. He led Jing Wuming along the winding path until the village gate appeared ahead. Jing Wuming didn't question him. He simply trusted Shi Feng's judgment. At the entrance, Shi Feng stopped and turned to him. Wait here. I need to fetch Tang San. Inside the village, Shi Feng found Tang San by the central fountain. Thanks to his purple demon eyes, Tang San had already witnessed and recognized Jing Wuming from that fateful day. For a moment, Tang San hesitated, then stepped forward, head bowed. Shi Feng, I owe you an apology. I misunderstood you before. The sincerity in Tang San's voice broke the last of Shi Feng's lingering resentment. He knew Tang San had acted out of genuine concern for his father and old Jack's safety, not malice. After Shi Feng accepted the apology and clarified the misunderstanding, he returned to the gate. Everything's settled, he told Jing Wuming, who nodded, relief washing over his features. With the air cleared and alliances mended, Shi Feng felt the weight of past suspicions lift at last. Shi Feng studied Jing Wuming with a faint, knowing smile. When you go back, make an effort to connect with your peers. Learn how to get along with others. Don't always keep to yourself. Jing Wuming's heart skipped a beat. Those words were almost identical to the lessons his adoptive father had drilled into him, lessons he'd long ignored because of his withdrawn nature. But Shi Feng's tone brooked no refusal. He straightened instantly. Yes, young master, he said, determined to follow the order. Shi Feng waved a hand. Forget calling me master. From now on, just call me young master. Understood. Good. Now go back and train hard. I'll let you know when I need you next. With that, Shi Feng turned and strode away, leaving Jing Wuming both challenged and inspired by his new charge. Page 26. Jing Wuming accepted the commission and departed for Nodding City, and life in Holy Soul Village settled back into a peaceful routine. At dawn, Shi Feng laced up his shoes for a morning run. Afternoons found him at Tang Hao's forge, hammering hot iron. Evenings were devoted to refining his martial techniques. Since Tang San's apology, his attitude toward Shi Feng had visibly softened, perhaps even surpassed the warmth they once enjoyed. Shi Feng understood why Tang San had confronted him before. It was all in defense of Tang Hao and old Jack. Were he in Tang San's place, he'd have done the same. Thoughts of avenging Matthew Nuo still flickered at the back of Shi Feng's mind, though no plan had yet formed. He reminded himself that a true gentleman's vengeance could wait, sometimes for 10 years, until he returned to Nodding City and the right opportunity presented itself. Week after week, the villagers grew accustomed to Shi Feng's odd habits. Their initial unease dissolved into casual indifference. Then, more than 2 months later, a full moon bathed the land in silver light, and a gentle mist crept across the fields. Chapter 21. Shi Feng's Ultimate Trial. It was rare for Shi Feng to skip his nightly practice. Now, well past midnight, the estate lay silent and dark, everyone else fast asleep. But on his cot in the corner of the sparring hall, Shi Feng sat cross-legged, eyes closed, heart pounding. Tonight, he would absorb his very first soul ring and ascend to the rank of Soul Master. For over 2 months, he had honed his body and willpower in relentless training. He wondered just how long he could endure once the ring's true power awakened, and what quality of soul ring fate would grant him. He'd heard that higher age rings bestowed stronger skills, but they also carried greater peril. Clasping his hands before him, Shi Feng drew on the ambient spiritual energy that pulsed through the hall's ley lines. The energy swirled around him like living silk. His mind went calm, his senses sharpened. Then, with a steady breath, he activated the system interface he'd discovered in his soul core. A holographic panel shimmered into view, its text clear and unblinking. System notice: you are about to absorb a God-bestowed soul ring. Soul rings grant powerful skills, typically the most critical ability for the moment. Higher age rings yield more potent effects. Warning: upon absorbing your first soul ring, you will face your first tribulation within 3 days. It is strongly recommended you absorb the entire ring at once to maximize your chance of surviving the upcoming trial. Proceed? Shi Feng's chest tightened. The first tribulation was a rite of passage that every fledgling soul master must endure. Many novices collapsed under its strain, or worse, never awoke again. But there was no turning back now. He steadied his breath. Proceed, he whispered. At once, the spectral outline of a luminescent ring materialized before him, suspended mid-air. Its surface rippled with concentrated spirit energy, glowing a soft silver. Shi Feng extended his right hand, fingertips trembling in anticipation. As soon as his skin touched the ring, a cascade of warmth and power shot through his veins. He felt his consciousness expand, as if he were waking from a deep, dreamless sleep. Streams of ethereal light coalesced around him, each tendril weaving into his soul core. The unbroken flow of spiritual energy sang through him like 1,000 voices in harmony. Moments later, the torrent slowed. Shi Feng clenched his fists, a radiant aura flickering around his form. On the system display, a new entry appeared. Acquisition complete. Soul ring. Age, 50 years. Received skill, Spirit Barrier. Generates a defensive shield that can absorb damage equivalent to 200% of the user's maximum spiritual power. Cooldown, 3 minutes. A smile tugged at the corner of Shi Feng's lips. A 50-year-old ring was exceptional for a first trial, and Spirit Barrier, just as he'd hoped, a defensive skill perfectly suited to helping him weather the coming tribulation. But no sooner had triumph settled in his chest than a new alert blinked on the interface. Tribulation imminent. You will begin your first tribulation in 72 hours. Survival odds, highly dependent on the strength and stability of your soul core and acquired skill. Recommendation: continue to reinforce your soul core and practice using Spirit Barrier. Good luck. Shi Feng exhaled, letting the tension drain away. The next 3 days would be critical. He pushed himself to the edge, determined to refine Spirit Barrier and temper his spirit until his core gleamed like obsidian. He had conquered the first hurdle. Now came the trial that would decide his fate. With renewed resolve, Shi Feng rose from his cot and resumed his practice, every movement sharper, every breath more focused, preparing himself for the storm that was sure to come. Are you sure you want to absorb it? Shi Feng's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate this time. He confirmed with a single-minded determination. After all, Absorbing his first soul ring was like a groom's first entry into the bridal chamber. How could he not be exhilarated? And besides, he'd never experienced that before. The moment he gave his answer, a small golden bead materialized out of thin air above his head. In the next instant, it burst into a torrent of radiant light and flowed down into his spirit crown. Shi Feng's entire body erupted in blinding gold, his figure taking on an almost Buddha-like presence. A divine, oppressive aura spilled outward, hanging in the air several meters around him. Inside the humble cottage, Tang Hao, who'd been sleeping off his drunken stupor, suddenly stirred. Carefully, so as not to rouse Tang San, he slipped off the bed and stepped into the dim corridor. His bleary eyes were drawn toward the village chief's courtyard next door. From behind one of the room's doors and windows, a slender beam of golden light streamed out. That unmistakable aura, he knew it at once. It was Shi Feng's. Tang Hao probed with his immense mental power, and his face suddenly drained of color, disbelief warping his features. He was sensing the aura of a spirit ring being absorbed, and by the strength of those fluctuations, it was by no means a low-grade ring. How on earth did this kid get a soul ring? Tang Hao murmured, brow furrowing. Could he have slain a 10-year soul beast? Soul beasts simply didn't exist within Holy Soul Village, so Shi Feng couldn't have hunted one. The only other explanation would be a 10-year soul beast voluntarily transforming and producing its first ring, something Tang Hao's wife, herself a 10-year soul beast, knew all too well. But if Shi Feng were secretly a transformed beast, his shift would have registered instantly to a Douluo title holder like Tang Hao. After watching Shi Feng all this time, he'd seen no sign of such a metamorphosis. So where had that spirit ring come from? Unable to resolve the mystery, Tang Hao fell silent, his gaze narrowing as he fixed Shi Feng with a look of deep suspicion. When the golden light flooded into Shi Feng's body, a comforting warmth spread through every fiber of his being, only to be replaced in an instant by a maelstrom of power. The God-bestowed spirit ring unleashed its energy like a tidal wave, crashing through his veins and shaking him to his core. At first, his ironclad constitution held firm. He even managed a small grin as the cleansing tide washed away the lingering dregs of fatigue and toxin from his marrow. But as the minutes ticked by, the pressure built so rapidly it was as though his entire system would burst. Heat radiated off his skin in shimmering waves, and sweat poured from every pore. Tiny black flecks, dross and impurity, swept out from his hairline and gathered at his feet. An hour later, Shi Feng's face was contorted in pain, veins bulging across his forehead like twisted cords. He could practically see the energy coiling beneath his skin, ready to explode. "No, I can't hold it much longer," he rasped, voice raw. With a guttural shout, he triggered the only release he had left. His body went rigid for a heartbeat, then slackened, eyes rolling back as his aura plummeted. In its place arose the eerie calm of his zombie form, a state that, though it dampened his senses and stalled his pulse, instantly relieved the intolerable pressure building within him. The transformation was jarring, but it bought him precious moments to stabilize before the spirit ring's inexorable power could overwhelm him completely. For the past 2 hours, Shi Feng had run the Celestial Corp's transmogrification technique without pause, channeling the soul ring's energy directly into his being. His soul force swelled at an unbelievable rate, pushing him to the brink of collapse. Every nerve in his body felt as though it might snap under the pressure. Then, with a thunderous roar that shook the very air, his martial soul burst into existence. A zombie-type martial soul, ghastly yet powerful, solidified before him and melded instantly with his essence. At once his frail body was reinforced, his muscles knitting together stronger than before. The searing pain that had tormented him for hours eased to a dull ache. Outside, Tang Hao had stood guard in front of Shi Feng's home for 3 long hours. He could feel that surging power ripple through the walls like a maelstrom. An hour earlier, those energy fluctuations had already far exceeded what a 10th-rank Soulmaster could safely absorb. Now, after another full hour of uninterrupted growth, the aura had reached a level lethal to even the most seasoned 10th-rank Soulmasters. Any ordinary cultivator at that tier would have been torn apart by the backlash in under 3 seconds. Yet Shi Feng's cultivation showed no sign of faltering. Instead, his strength only continued to ascend. A glowing ring of yellow energy swirled around Shi Feng, its color darkening by the second. Ever since the Wuhun had merged with him, his body's strength had soared, but now that power was rising too fast. In less than an hour, he had pushed past his limit for the third time. Agonizing pain radiated through every fiber of his being, as though his very bones would shatter, and the torment struck not only his body, but his soul itself. Shi Feng cracked his eyes open and stared at the glowing ring of energy circling him. Its usual yellow hue was deepening, shifting toward a rich purple. 1,000-year soul ring. He'd actually done it! According to Yu Xiaogang's theories, reaching this level was all but impossible at his stage. Shi Feng's heart thundered with triumph. But the purple glow hadn't fully formed. Mustering every scrap of willpower, he squeezed his eyes shut and forced himself onward. Agony racked his body. Every nerve felt on fire, every muscle convulsing. Sweat poured off him, mixed with grime, and stung the air with its rancid scent. Tiny beads of blood welled up on his skin, and his veins bulged as if about to burst. Each breath was a battle. The world spun, growing dim and distant. He lost track of time. Minutes blurred into hours. His consciousness fluttered on the brink of collapse, energy draining from him until it finally flickered out. The moment his defenses snapped, his body gave in. He slumped into unconsciousness. Outside, Tang Hao stood motionless, watching. When Shi Feng's torment at last ended, Tang Hao exhaled a long, relieved sigh. The chamber fell silent, save for the soft, even rhythm of Shi Feng's breathing as he finally found rest. Shi Feng had been waiting for over 4 hours, and dawn was still a couple of hours away. Restless, Tang Hao lay on his bed, unable to sleep. His powerful spirit perception had confirmed what everyone else could only speculate. Shi Feng had indeed absorbed the spirit ring, and not just any ring, but a fearsomely potent one. Tang Hao couldn't tell precisely how many years Feng's new soul ring represented, but it had to be extraordinary. If Shi Feng survived this trial, Tang Hao thought, he'd become a household name across the Douluo continent. Just then, old Jack began pounding on Shi Feng's door. "Feng! Feng!" he called. The sun was already high, and Shi Feng's habit was to rise at first light. Why hadn't he answered? Jack rapped on the door again, but there was no response. Heart-pounding, he flung the door open and was assaulted by a rank stench that dwarfed even the worst latrine smells. There, lying motionless and smeared with blood, was Shi Feng. Without hesitating, old Jack pushed aside the filth and reek. He knelt beside Shi Feng, gripped his shoulders, and shook him. "Feng, what's happened?" Chapter 22. The First Soul Skill. Shi Feng jolted awake, blinking against the morning light. For a moment he lay still, his mind foggy from last night's soul ring absorption. Then he noticed old Jack standing over him, brushing dust off his clothes. "Grandpa, did you just fart?" Shi Feng pinched his nose. "It smells awful." Old Jack huffed, stroking his long white beard with one hand and adjusting his crutch with the other. "Don't pin that on me. Did you fall into the latrine? You come home reeking like that and crawl into my quilt without washing. Am I your personal laundress?" Shi Feng grinned sheepishly. "Relax, Grandpa. I'll shower and clean the quilt myself. You don't have to worry about it." The old man shook his head as he shuffled toward the door. Then he paused, turned back, and fixed Shi Feng with a stern look. "I'm heading to the next village today. I'll arrange a work-study position for you there. Make sure you have dinner ready by the time I get back." "Understood," Shi Feng said, pushing himself up. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "Safe travels." Old Jack gave him one last disapproving glance at his dusty clothes, then hobbled out the door. Left alone in the quiet cottage, Shi Feng closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the residual spiritual energy of the soul ring coursing through him. Today would be the start of something new. As soon as old Jack left, Shi Feng sprang out of bed, only to freeze at the sight and smell of the thick black muck clinging to his skin. It was foul beyond description, far worse than any latrine stench he'd ever endured. Had his stomach not already been empty, he would have retched on the spot. The sludge stuck to him like wet clay, and revolting. He'd been itching to try out his soul ability for the first time, but that idea had to wait. Grumbling, Shi Feng grabbed his quilt, tucked a hand-carved lye soap made from a sacred soap horn under his arm, and stepped outside. Though his home lay at the very center of Holy Soul Village, an ordinarily peaceful place, This morning the air was heavy with a rancid odor. A sudden gust of wind whipped the stench through the courtyard, and Shi Feng pinched his nostrils. What on earth happened? Did someone's outhouse just blow up? What is that horrendous stench? Who the hell's poisoning our village? I'll find that son of a bitch myself. Dad, wake up and eat your porridge. Seriously, what's that smell? It's enough to kill me. Shi Feng pressed his face into the quilt, cheeks burning. Hearing the villagers hurl curses, he shrank down until only a small heap of straw and blanket remained. Then, without a second thought, he bolted from his hut and tore out of the village. There he goes. Look, it's that kid, Shi Feng. Good heavens, did he actually fall into the cesspit? By the looks of it, yeah, those lumps of black muck. I can't even stand to watch. Shi Feng's ears burned hotter than his face. Mortified to be splattered in raw sewage, he sprinted at full tilt, hoping to escape their eyes. Not a single drop of water had touched him since he tumbled into the pit, and the humiliation stung more sharply than the muck itself. He could already picture the moment. Decades from now, people would bring up the day Shi Feng fell into the latrine as his one notorious black mark. Ahead, Tang San paused on the path, eyes wide in disbelief. There, barreling past him, was Shi Feng. Blanket clutched around his shoulders, every inch soaked in filth, while behind him the villagers whispered and pointed, their outrage at the village poisoner, echoing down the street. Chapter 4. An hour later, Shi Feng emerged from the riverbank, freshly scrubbed and with even the quilt washed clean. He paused at the water's edge, only to find dozens of fish floating belly up, lifeless, white bellies bobbing on the current. It was such a waste, but he shrugged the thought aside. If the river was depleted, the mountains would still teem with game. A surge of excitement coursed through him as he recalled the details of his soul skills. He slung the quilt over a low branch, stripped off his clothes, and stood naked before the flowing water. Since regaining consciousness, he'd possessed full knowledge of his first soul ability, summon undead martial soul. Now he would put it to the test. Concentrating his soul force, Shi Feng whispered the incantation. In an instant, a soft violet glow coalesced at his ankles, forming a perfectly circular ring that revolved with a gentle hum. His heart pounded as he watched the light. It's a purple soul ring, a 1,000-year soul ring, he breathed, eyes shining. According to Master Yu Xiaogong's teachings, the first soul ring a soul master could summon was capped at 420 years. Shi Feng had hoped one day to push past that ceiling, but never in his wildest dreams did he expect to shatter it on his very first attempt, exceeding the standard limit by more than double. He wiggled his toes, feeling the ring's power pulse through him. This was only the beginning. Shi Feng had done it entirely on his own, no external aid, only his undead body bolstered by the power of his martial soul. He'd fully absorbed a 1,000-year soul ring. If not for the looming threat of the heavenly tribulation, he never would have dared press the ring's cycle to its limit. After all, the tribulation could kill him outright. Only desperation would drive anyone to such lengths. A satisfied smile curved his lips as he released his first soul skill. Instantly, a viscous, pitch-black substance seeped over his flesh and solidified into an imposing suit of armor. The plating was translucent yet unbreakable, its surface gleaming like dark glass. Thick obsidian spikes jutted from his shoulders, elbows, and knees, transforming him into a fearsome figure. He tapped the gauntlet on his forearm. Its hardness rivaled bone, but it rang with a clear, metallic tone. With a single thought, the helm slid into place, concealing his face until only his eyes, nose, and mouth remained visible. Satisfied, Shi Feng strolled down to the riverbank and paused to admire his reflection in the water. He grinned broadly, pleased at the power he now wielded. If Shi Feng had to sum up the armor in one word, it would be imposing. The sleek, daunting appearance was impressive enough, but its true power far surpassed any stylistic flourish. Known as the zombie god armor, its primary gift is defense. The moment Shi Feng activated it, his defensive rating exploded, soaring by 150% in raw terms, which translated to roughly a 15-fold increase in actual resilience. But the enhancements didn't stop there. The armor also doubled both his strength and his speed. While those boosts weren't as staggering as the defensive surge, a 2x multiplier on offense and agility remains extraordinary. By comparison, A top-tier soul master over level 30, equipped with millennia-old soul rings, might only double one attribute at most. Shi Feng's zombie god armor, however, elevates 3 key stats simultaneously, making it a truly elite soul skill. What made this even more terrifying was Shi Feng's already exceptional baseline. His strength, speed, and defenses were already well above normal limits. With the god armor's buff layered on top, he was poised to become an almost unstoppable force. Once Shi Feng activated the skill, even soul masters of equal rank would find it nearly impossible to break through his defenses. As expected, it's a defensive technique, he thought, confirming what he'd suspected before, absorbing the spirit ring. After all, a God-given spirit ring will always manifest as the most useful ability for its bearer. Yet no, skill is flawless. This defensive barrier could only be maintained for 30 minutes, and unleashing it had already consumed a third of Shi Feng's total soul power. When the half-hour elapsed, the barrier would automatically dissipate, and he could reactivate it, but only at the cost of another hefty chunk of his soul energy. Unless he somehow fought while expending almost no soul power, he could only rely on it once per battle. Even so, given its tremendous protective value, Shi Feng considered the trade-off well worth it. After all, most confrontations would be decided within 30 minutes, barring an opponent who, like Tang San, had an arsenal of tricks up his sleeve. Shi Feng reached out and tapped the armor's polished surface a few times. Each clang resonated like a ringing challenge. Secure in his reinforced defenses, he prepared for whatever lay ahead. Chapter 23. The Thunder Tribulation arrives. Shi Feng ran a hand over his newly acquired armor, its metallic sheen gleaming under the faint light. Could it really shield him from lightning? He wasn't sure. But then, why would the system have given him this skill if it weren't meant for just such an ordeal? The closer he came to his tribulation, the more he felt its oppressive weight bearing down on him. He had only 3 days to prepare, and failure wasn't an option. If he couldn't pass this trial, his path forward would be irreparably blocked. He paused mid-stride. Tang Hao, his fellow titled Douluo, might be able to help. A warrior of Tang Hao's caliber could surely divert or at least mitigate a lightning-based calamity aimed at a mere soul master like himself. Shi Feng frowned. But if I pull him into this... At that moment, the system's prompt echoed in his mind. Warning. Summoning aid to overcome your tribulation will invoke a thunder calamity commensurate with the strength of your ally. Please consider carefully, host. Shi Feng's face went pale. He swallowed hard, realizing that dragging Tang Hao into this would only make matters worse. My goodness, he whispered, dread tightening his chest. The countdown had begun. There was no turning back now. He'd meant to ask Tang Hao for help ages ago. That was why he'd spent the past 2 months endlessly hammering iron at Tang Hao's blacksmith shop. He never imagined the system would suddenly block him from seeking assistance now. Sigh, I guess I'll have to handle this on my own, Shi Feng muttered to himself. He glanced up at the system interface. His status had just updated. Host, Shi Feng Douluo level 13, zombie level 112. With a resigned shake of his head, Shi Feng turned away from the display. No more detours, no more favors. This time, he truly was on his own. Shi Feng opened his inventory and studied the new acquisitions. Soul Ring, 1100-year grade. Soul Skill, Zombie God Armor. Items, Dark Blessing Potion, Soul Ring Upgrade Coupon, usable on rings levels 11 to 20. The Dark Blessing Potion could instantly mend even grievous wounds, a potential lifesaver when he next faced Heaven's Tribulation. The upgrade coupon, meanwhile, could age one of his soul rings by 200 years at a stroke, dramatically boosting all its skill effects. But the coupon only worked on rings between grade 11 and grade 20, and right now, his freshly absorbed ring had just vaulted him up 3 soul power tiers. Shi Feng wasn't about to squander such a valuable resource prematurely. He paused to check his soul power resystem. Sure enough, the new ring had elevated him by 3 levels. All that previous effort had paid off, just as he'd hoped. Shoving the quilt under his arm, Shi Feng tucked the Dark Blessing Potion and the upgrade coupon into his bag. He'd saved the coupon for the critical moment of his tribulation crossing. With a final glance at the village outskirts, he turned and headed back into Saint Soul Village. By noon, old Jack clattered in through the gate, wiping sweat from his brow. Shi Feng's gratitude nearly overwhelmed him when old Jack, weary but determined, persuaded several neighboring villages to help secure a work-study place for him at Notting College. From the moment Shi Feng could walk, the old man had treated him like his own grandson, and now at last, he'd done everything in his power to give him a future. But Shi Feng hadn't confided in anyone that he planned to slip away in 2 days. If his journey failed and he never returned, he couldn't bear the thought of old Jack's heartbreak. With no one else to turn to, he resolved to find a hidden trail through the mist-shrouded mountains and ancient forests, one that would let him evade the bandits preying on travelers' caravans. He wasn't worried about old Jack's pension running out. Tang San would be there to look after him, but he fretted constantly over how painfully lonely the old man would be once Shi Feng was gone. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparations, and of Shi Feng's attempts to leave nothing but good memories behind. He cooked fresh river fish and savory cuts of meat, delighting old Jack so thoroughly that the old man laughed until tears pricked his eyes and praised Shi Feng's filial devotion. Little did he suspect this might be their final meal together. Before dawn on the 3rd day, Shi Feng slipped into Tang San's cottage. "Listen carefully," he said, voice low but steady. "You must promise to care for old Jack as if he were your own grandfather." Tang San stared at him, stunned by the seriousness in Shi Feng's dark eyes and by the unspoken farewell that hung between them. Shi Feng shut his mouth under Tang San's persistent questioning. No matter what Tang San might learn, it wouldn't help him. At noon, after sharing a final meal with old Jack, he quietly returned to his tiny room. He folded his quilt with precise care, cast one long glance around the humble walls, and slipped out of the village without daring to look back. He'd heard tales of a vast forest to the south, reachable within half a day's travel, an isolated place where few dared to tread, perfect for laying low. Pushing himself hard, Shi Feng covered the distance in just 2 hours and slipped beneath the forest's dense canopy. True to the rumors, there were no soul beasts here. Only ordinary wildlife rustled in the undergrowth. After all, villages this close to the woods would have been in constant peril otherwise. Beyond the great hunting reserves, the Stardew Great Forest, the Frozen Forest, and the Sunset Forest, the Heaven Doe Empire kept most spirit beasts confined. Any rogue soul beast spotted near a settlement was immediately reported to the city-state. Imperial troops would then be dispatched to eliminate or capture it, sending the beast to one of the official spirit-hunting forests. Although this forest harbors no soul, beasts, its wildlife is nonetheless ferocious enough to strike dread into anyone but the most hardened hunters or soul masters. Shi Feng pressed deeper into the mountains, where rolling peaks bristled with dense woodland. With each step, the trees grew taller, and the signs of human passage vanished. Every so often, a tiger's roar would resound through the underbrush, a stark reminder that even experienced hunters seldom ventured this far. At last, Shi Feng halted and turned his gaze to the highest peak before him, a faint smile playing on his lips. "So you're the one," he murmured. This mountain stood at the very heart of the forest, its isolation so complete that not even thunder on a clear day would draw curiosity. There were no paths here, but Shi Feng's formidable strength made the climb straightforward. Thorns and vines tore at his clothing, yet none drew blood. 10 minutes later, he crested the summit, where trees thinned out and thin earth yielded to vast, unbroken slabs of gray stone. Shi Feng scanned the clearing and chose a broad, flat stone to sit upon. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, turning the rock beneath him uncomfortably hot. Not a breath of wind stirred the oppressive heat, and even the birds were silent. Every leaf and blade of grass seemed to wilt under the merciless sun. Settling into a cross-legged posture, Shi Feng closed his eyes and recalled the last time a powerful undead had survived its own thunder tribulation. That zombie had already been formidable before the tempest struck. Still, its ordeal couldn't compare to the thunder tribulation Shi Feng was about to endure. Even so, he hoped to draw some lesson from its survival. A wry smile curved his lips as he expelled the thought. There was only one option: endure. "Come on," he murmured, steeling himself. He'd traversed worlds to reach the Douluo continent and carried with him both a unique cultivation system and hard-earned skills. He wasn't about to quit now. Resting his hands on his knees, he focused inward. Deep within his bloodline, the memory of the golden thunder pulsed once more. Maybe, just maybe, that ancient power would surface again and guide him safely through the coming storm. Shi Feng settled into a cross-legged stance and began running the heavenly corpse transformation technique, emptying his mind and fine-tuning his internal state. 30 minutes later, his eyes snapped open. Ink-black irises and a pair of razor-sharp fangs revealed that he'd fully assumed his zombie form. In that instantaneous shift, the zombie martial spirit surged forth and fused with him, immediately bolstering his defenses, strength, and every other attribute. Shi Feng lifted his chin and whispered, "It's time." He fixed his dark eyes on the vast blue sky, a faint spark of power flickering in their depths. Almost at once, an oppressive tension pressed in on him, as though the world itself had begun to tighten its grip. A deafening crack split the air. Thousands of miles of clear sky roared with thunder, and directly above Shi Feng, a colossal black cloud coalesced from emptiness. It pulsed with a terrifying, undulating aura. His heart seized as if gripped by a boulder, each breath coming slower than the last. Every roll of thunder sent pins and needles dancing across his scalp, and the sense of imminent danger escalated 100-fold. In the realm of the supernatural, thunder, especially the mighty Yang thunder caliber, was the supreme bane of fiends like the undead. Not even an ancient zombie who had honed its cultivation for millennia could withstand such a cataclysm. Shi Feng knew he was no ordinary zombie, but against this oncoming storm he was still outmatched. In the novels, immortal cultivators facing apocalyptic calamities could fall back on enchanted weapons or protective formations. Shi Feng had nothing but his own body and the will to endure. Shi Feng sat motionless in the uninhabited mountain forest, far from prying eyes. Here, the world was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves and the growing rumble above him. A small, dark cloud of tribulation had formed directly over his head, an odd blot against the otherwise clear sky. Thunder rolled within its depths, each echo tightening Shi Feng's chest with apprehension. He knew the moment he had been dreading had arrived. Without warning, the cloud swelled, crackling with raw energy. Then a single lightning bolt, thick as an arm, tore through the air and struck him squarely on the crown of his head. Shi Feng had deliberately held back his first soul technique. He didn't know how many tribulations remained or how long they would last, and he understood that each successive trial could prove far more dangerous than the last. Scorched light flashed through his nerves, his scalp tingled fiercely, and every hair on his head stood on end. The instantaneous jolt shattered his focus and halted the flow of his celestial corpse transformation technique. For a moment, his body went completely limp. Legs splayed, he toppled out of his lotus posture and collapsed onto the cold forest floor, as still as a statue, awaiting whatever the heavens would throw at him next. Shi Feng's black eyes snapped open as lightning crackled all around him, each bolt wrenching through his body in a relentless storm of pain. His limbs trembled violently, and he felt as though his flesh and bones were being ground beneath an invisible millstone. The instant the thunderbolt entered his body, every last spark of his soul power was snuffed out, as if the lightning itself were his nemesis. Though the torrent of energy lashed him for only a few minutes, it stretched into an eternity of agony, longer than any spirit ring he'd ever absorbed. Without that past ordeal to steel his nerves, he might already have lost consciousness. At last, the thunder ceased. The white-hot pain gradually ebbed into a maddening itch. Gasping, Shi Feng forced himself upright, his heart still hammering in his chest. The torment he'd endured eclipsed even the rigorous trials of spirit ring absorption. Far above, the swirling robbery cloud clung to the sky. The storm hadn't broken, but was merely gathering strength for its next assault. A cold dread settled in his gut as he realized the worst was yet to come. Shi Feng had lost count of how many thunderbolts had struck so far, and he dreaded each new blast, certain the next one would be even more devastating. His clothes were in tatters, his hair singed, and a sharp, acrid scent of burning fabric clung to him. He patted himself down, heart racing, relieved to find every limb intact. But when he probed his soul power, his relief dissolved into shock. His physical form was unhurt, yet a full third of his spirit energy had been drained. Damn, he thought, I almost lost my soul on the very first strike. Just moments ago, he had dispersed his soul power throughout his body to absorb the brunt of the lightning. Without that barrier, the agony would have been unbearable. Now, high above him, thunderheads churned with renewed fury, the electric charge growing more violent by the second. Gritting his teeth, Shi Feng sat cross-legged on the scorched ground and began rebuilding his soul force. Inch by inch, he guided energy back into his core. Minutes later, before he could finish recovering, the sky split with a deafening crack, and the second bolt of lightning slammed down. Shi Feng didn't hesitate. In an instant, he unleashed his first soul skill, stiff armor, and the ethereal plating snapped into place around him. The lightning bolt that followed cost him a third of his soul power, but without this skill, he would have been helpless. He knew all too well that, later on, when his soul power ran low, he'd be filled with regret if he hadn't used it now. The crackling bolt slammed against the armor and held fast. To his surprise, the plating truly did repel most of the surge. Still, thin filaments of electricity snaked through the seams, in his eyes, his nostrils, even his mouth. Pain lanced through him again, but it was nowhere near as brutal as before. The armor had absorbed the worst of the shock, preventing the full force from tearing through his body. It was as if he'd built an impassable dam around himself, letting only the tiniest rivulets of lightning seep inside. Around him, the thunderous energy continued to splinter against the armor's surface, but the crushing pressure eased. Shi Feng drew a steadying breath, bracing himself for whatever struck next. Lightning surged through Shi Feng's body, its roar echoing the day he first absorbed a spirit ring. The torrential power refined his flesh and bones, expelling every lingering impurity. For several breathless minutes, crackling strands of electricity coiled around him, battering his defenses. Then, just as the storm seemed to dissipate, a sudden vacuum welled up from his core, and the lightning was drawn inward in an instant. Shi Feng froze, eyes wide, as the bolts vanished into the golden elixir core at his center. He realized with a start that the first strike of lightning had already fused itself into that hidden power, and now the second did exactly the same before his very eyes. A surge of irritation flared in his chest. Twice he had endured heaven's wrath, yet his core's dormant lightning had remained silent through the ordeal. Only afterward did it greedily devour the remaining energy, as though savoring the fruits of his struggle. It felt almost mocking, his own body stealing the victory he had bled for. All he could do was clench his fists and grit his teeth in silence. Shi Feng's heart raced as the telltale crackle of brewing energy heralded the third thunderbolt. Desperate, he funneled the last of his spirit energy into his protective barrier. After the second strike, he had less than a third of his reserves left. 10 agonizing minutes later, the sky split open once more. The third bolt hurtled down. His armor still absorbed most of its force, but the sheer ferocity of that strike rattled him to his core. Before he could steady himself, the fourth bolt struck, then the fifth, the sixth. Each succeeding thunderbolt let loose an even more terrifying blast of power. Even the smallest breach in his barrier sent ripples of agony through his body, racking him with spasms so intense words could scarcely convey the pain. And yet, as each violent surge subsided, a peculiar warmth spread through his nerves. Those fleeting moments of calm tasted almost like relief, an odd, almost welcome contrast to the raw torment. Do I actually thrive on this pain? Shi Feng wondered, torn between disbelief and the strange pull of exhilaration. When the seventh bolt finally faded, he realized his spirit reserves were completely spent. Every scrap of soul power had been drained away, leaving him utterly empty. Chapter 25, The Tribulation's Gift Pack. Dark storm clouds still churned overhead, and Shi Feng's heart grew heavier with each crash of thunder. Rain had pounded his hermitage all night, and just as he felt the last of his soul force return, the brilliant aura of his divine armor flickered out, leaving him completely exposed. He gasped, "No, this can't be happening." Before he could react, the heavens roared, and the eighth lightning bolt struck without mercy. Shi Feng's newly restored soul force was woefully insufficient. The instant the bolt struck, searing agony ripped through him, as if his sinew and bone were being torn apart. Stripped of his armor's protection, the raw divine energy surged through his meridians, scorching flesh and shattering his channels. Dozens of lacerations opened across his body, blood spouting from each wound as crackling arcs of lightning danced over his skin. His eyes rolled back in their sockets. Had he not been sustained by his transformed state, they would surely have turned white. His back arched in a grotesque curve, and the stone slab beneath him quickly soaked up his blood, staining it a dark crimson. Shi Feng lay sprawled on the ground, utterly powerless to even cry out. Only a raspy ho-ho escaped his throat as relentless lightning crackled and danced beneath his skin. At last, when the storm of energy within him began to falter, the corpse pill activated again, greedily siphoning off the final sparks of lightning. When the thunder and flashes finally subsided, the agony that remained was no longer the sharp tingle of electricity, but a savage, shredding pain that tore at his body and at the very fabric of his clothes with horrifying intensity. He couldn't even flex a single finger. Helpless, he stared up at the storm clouds still roiling overhead, every breath a torment. Desperation drove him to one final option. He summoned the blessing potion from the system. The moment it touched his lips, a cool wave of energy swept through him, suffusing every muscle and sinew with restorative power. He watched in awe as wounds knitted closed before his eyes, and the ruptured meridians in his limbs wove themselves back together with astonishing speed. The inhuman pain evaporated, replaced by a soothing warmth that even revived his weary spirit. It was as if he'd been dragged from hell itself and set down in a paradise of healing light. A soft, involuntary sound of relief slipped past his lips. No longer a gasp of pain, but the first true sigh he'd drawn in what felt like an eternity. In mere seconds, Shi Feng's body had healed to its peak. Every muscle, every sinew perfectly restored, save for one thing: his soul power was completely spent. He was still caught in the fading afterglow of that final surge when a deafening crack of thunder ripped through the sky, yanking him back to reality. Brilliant forks of lightning stabbed through the roiling black clouds above, and the air inside this space grew palpably heavier, suffused with raw, electric menace. Shi Feng's heart clenched. If the 8th lightning strike had come close to shattering him entirely, what kind of devastation would the 9th unleash? All he had left was his soul ring upgrade token, but with no soul power to fuel it, the token was worthless. Even if he upgraded to a 10-year-old soul ring, he still couldn't unleash a single soul skill. A pang of regret stabbed him. He should have used that token the moment he acquired it. With a stronger soul ring, his skills might have consumed far less power, perhaps leaving him with at least a sliver of soul energy now. But regrets are beyond remedy, especially when the next thunderbolt is hurtling down to strike without warning. Shi Feng doesn't know how many lightning strikes have pummeled him already, but he's certain the 9th one will finish him. With a frantic leap, he dashes toward the far edge of the mountaintop, only to realize that the storm cloud above seems to track his every move. There's nowhere left to run. He skids to a halt. It's no use. With nothing left to fight for, he sinks to the rocky ground and closes his eyes, memories surging through his mind. 2 lifetimes worth of faces and moments flash before him, but the image he clings to is old Jack's wrinkled, kindly face. If he dies here, no one will know what happened. Old Jack will simply think he wandered off, and maybe spend the rest of his years anxiously waiting at the village gates for Shi Feng's return. A thunderous roar overhead jolts him back to the present before he can sink any deeper into regret. The 9th bolt screams down from the sky like an executioner's axe. It strikes with blinding intensity, a column of electricity the thickness of a man's thigh, engulfing Shi Feng in searing light. Stone and dust explode outward as the world cracks and shatters. When the flash finally fades, all that remains on the shattered crags is a ruined scrap of cloth. A few heartbeats later, Shi Feng's body emerges from the dust. It's been flattened as though a colossal wrecking ball had crushed him, his flesh scorched and ragged. Horribly, all that's left of him now is charred skin clinging to shattered bone. Shi Feng's mind went blank, frozen by the sheer agony. But after a few agonizing minutes, he fought his way back to consciousness. When he opened his eyes, the chaos of that day's raid had finally dissipated. Shi Feng forced himself to lift his head, scanning his battered body with hollow eyes. He was alive, but what did that matter? His leg was shattered, his waist broken. He could no longer even sit upright. A bitter smile curved his lips. The heavenly tribulation was more savage than he had ever imagined. Just as hopelessness threatened to consume him, a childlike chime echoed inside his mind. Congratulations, host, on surviving the first catastrophe. You have earned a grand gift pack. Please check your rewards. At once, Shi Feng's deathly gray eyes sparked with renewed hope, as though a drowning man had spotted a final lifeline. This gift pack might hold the cure for every injury he'd sustained. Open it, please, he longed. In response, the grand gift pack materialized before him in a swirl of blue light, its lid peeling back to reveal a handful of items. Shi Feng's gaze lit upon them, one by one, until it locked on a single vial of Thunder Tribulation liquid. Legend said a drop could mend any wound. His heart thundered in his chest. Trembling, he reached out. If this elixir was genuine, then against all odds, he still had a chance to rise again. Shi Feng didn't even bother looking down. He decided, without hesitation, to use this single drop of Thunder Tribulation liquid. Suspended in midair above him was a bead of opalescent fluid, its swirling 5 colors glowing like molten jade and giving off the faintest, most intoxicating fragrance. Instantly, every flower on the mountaintop burst into bloom. Vines and grasses surged upward, covering the ground in a riot of green. He inhaled deeply. As the liquid descended, every trace of agony in his body vanished. With his mouth wide open, Shi Feng let the Thunder Tribulation liquid slip in. It tasted remarkably sweet and electric on his tongue. Almost at once, his entire form was bathed in brilliant light. Cracked and shattered bones knit back together, emerging stronger than before. His meridians realigned and expanded, clearing every channel of stagnant qi. Flesh and blood wove themselves anew, and even his lost manhood returned, pulsing with renewed vitality. The scorch marks on his scalp and skin split open, revealing pristine new tissue beneath, soft and pink yet tough as leather. Thick black hair sprouted in clumps, cascading over the boulder beneath him. In the span of a heartbeat, Shi Feng had been reborn. Chapter 26. A Frail Body and Deficient Techniques. The brilliant glow dissipated. Shi Feng pushed himself to his feet, feeling scraps of charred skin flake away from his soles. He was completely naked, his waist-length hair still trailing across the ground like damp ropes. Carefully probing his body, he couldn't suppress a triumphant grin. The crushing force of the tribulation had receded, and not only that, he felt stronger than before. His soul power surged within him, far surpassing the level he'd held prior to the lightning calamity. He accessed his system's status display with a thought, soul power level 14. Shi Feng curled a corner of his mouth. He'd narrowly escaped death, and though the so-called Thunder Calamity serum he'd consumed had looked miraculous, it had only boosted his soul power marginally. Regardless, he was alive, and right now, that was the greatest victory of all. With renewed confidence, he turned his attention back to the transcending tribulation gift bag floating before him. He tapped its icon, and a scroll of options unfurled. Lightning Fist Technique, 3,000 lightning moves. Shi Feng's brow furrowed. His body was still fragile, his physical constitution too weak to fully harness high-grade martial arts. And as for boxing or movement arts, he was practically a novice. He sighed softly. First things first, I need to strengthen my foundation. He selected the lower-level routines, ones he could realistically practice without risking injury. As the gift bag's magic folded away, he set to work forging a sturdier physique and, step by step, refining the martial techniques that would carry him through the next tribulation. Shi Feng's eyes shone with renewed excitement. Aside from his raw cultivation and brute strength, he'd never really faced true combat. Otherwise, Tang San wouldn't have overwhelmed him so mercilessly last time. Back then, he'd planned to take his revenge the moment he absorbed a new spirit ring. He knew the ring's ability would boost his speed, but even that wouldn't be enough to corner someone as quick and elusive as Tang San. The thought of losing again, and with it his pride, kept him from challenging Tang San outright. Now, almost as if fate had intervened, the system had granted him something he'd only dreamed of, a brand new movement technique. Produced by the system itself, it couldn't be anything less than top tier. Its name, Sanqian Leidong, echoed with promise, 3,000 bolts of lightning movement. In Shi Feng's mind, Sanqian Leidong would rival Tang San's famed Ghost Shadow Fan. If he could match Tang San in sheer agility, he wouldn't even need elaborate martial forms. His strength alone would carry the day. He pictured himself closing the gap, striking faster and harder until Tang San had no recourse but to yield. Even now, without tapping into any soul power, Shi Feng's base strength hovered around 2,000 jin. The moment he activated his first soul ability, that figure would double, well over 4,000 jin of lifting power. With Sanchan Leidong layered on top, he finally felt ready to turn the tables on his rival. Shi Feng was certain that if he could catch up to Tang San, he could still get the drop on him, even without unleashing any spirit powers. He glanced at his long black hair trailing past his waist and felt a twinge of irritation. After a moment's thought, he wound it around his neck a few times and let the rest fall over his chest like a dark scarf. With the sun dipping below the western ridges, he cast one last look at the tangled summit behind him and set off. He dashed down the country road, heart pounding, hair streaming behind him like a banner, like a boy chasing the wind. His pace home was far swifter than his climb had been, and by sticking to deserted trails, he made sure no one saw him. But the instant he reached the outskirts of Holy Soul Village, he realized he wasn't out of danger yet. Shi Feng huddled in the shadows, shivering. At 6 years old, he didn't have the nerve to walk into the village naked, so he'd crept away as night fell. Dusk had turned to darkness, and almost every villager was safely indoors. Old Jack, cane in hand, was now going door to door, calling out for Shi Feng. Each unanswered knock made his stooped shoulders quake with worry. Shi Feng's little heart ached at the sound of the old man's hoarse, fragile voice. When he was sure the searchers had passed, he slipped back to his hiding place, snipped off a few strands of hair with a pair of shears, and threw on his clothes. Then he burst from the shadows, shouting, "Grandpa!" But there was no reply. He paused at the village gate and picked up faint voices drifting from beyond the houses, old Jack's distressed calls and the urgent replies of Tang Hao and his son, Tang San. Without thinking, Shi Feng sprinted toward the riverbank. Ahead, 3 lanterns bobbed along the water's edge. Old Jack, Tang Hao, and Tang San were scouring the shallow shore, their lamps casting trembling circles of light on the rocks. Old Jack's voice cracked with the edge of tears as he called out into the night. Tang Hao put a reassuring hand on Old Jack's shoulder. "Village chief, don't worry, I'll wade in and take a look." "Right, Mr. Jack. Rest easy," Tang San added, discreetly activating his purple magic eyes. But despite his efforts, the water was too deep and murky to see the bottom. Without hesitation, Tang Hao tore off his outer garments, revealing a powerful, muscular build, and readied himself to enter the water. Just then, movement behind them caught his attention, and he heard a familiar shout. "Grandpa!" Tang Hao paused, startled. Hastily, he redressed, turning to see Shi Feng racing toward them. "Grandpa!" Shi Feng skidded to a halt in front of old Jack, chest heaving. The concern that had knit Jack's brow moments ago vanished in an instant, replaced by a mock sternness. He lifted his crutch and playfully smacked Shi Feng on the backside. "You little rascal," old Jack scolded, voice clipped. "Go off and play somewhere safe, will you? I'll smack you for real if you keep rushing headlong into danger." Shi Feng flinched only slightly. He stood still under the gentle thwack, letting Jack have his moment. Inside, his heart clenched at the glint of unshed tears in the old man's eyes. Tears Jack thought he'd hidden perfectly. But Shi Feng saw them all the same. Moments ago, old Jack had lost his temper and given Shi Feng a sharp swat on the rear. He immediately regretted it. Reaching out, he patted the boy apologetically. "You little rascal, you didn't even try to hide. Did I hurt you?" Shi Feng shook his head and rubbed his backside. "I'm fine, Grandpa. I'm just hungry. Let's head home and cook something." All right, let's go." Supporting old Jack's arm, Shi Feng led the way back through the craggy mountain trail. When they reached the house, old Jack turned to the 2 men who had helped them. "Tang Hao, Tang San, thank you both for your hard work today." "No problem, Grandpa Jack," Tang Hao replied with a respectful bow. Tang San grinned. "It was nothing." Old Jack's expression softened, then he glanced back at Shi Feng. "Xiaofeng, where were you all afternoon? You had us worried." Shi Feng's cheeks warmed. "I accidentally fell asleep on the mountain and only woke up after dark." Old Jack stomped a foot in relief. "Don't scare us like that again. You should have sent a messenger. I'm sorry, Grandpa, Shi Feng said sincerely. Dinner passed quietly. Once the plates were cleared, Shi Feng withdrew to a corner of the room and activated his system interface. The display listed his current stats. Host name, Shi Feng Spirit Master level 14, Zombie level 1 Soul Ring. Age 1,100 years. Soul skill, Zombie God Armor Inventory. Soul Ring Upgrade Coupon, 11th 20th. Boxing skill, Lightning Fist. Movement skill, 3,000 Thunder. After surviving the recent catastrophe, his Spirit Master rank had jumped to level 14. Unfortunately, his zombie rank remained stubbornly at level 1, with no sign of improvement, yet. Shi Feng's gaze settled on the last two techniques, Lightning Fist and 3,000 Thunders. Intrigued most by the promise of powerful bodywork, he tapped into the entry for 3,000 Thunders first. Instantly, a brief but vivid description flashed through his mind. 3,000 Thunders moves like a storm, ever-shifting, endlessly evolving, and capable of rapid breakthroughs. Those few words were precise, but as the description faded, Shi Feng found himself staring at swirling visions of thunder and lightning. No detailed steps, no choreographed routines, only raw, crackling energy. He frowned. Weren't these supposed to be martial movement techniques? How could 3,000 variations and lightning-fast evolution be represented by nothing more than an endless flash of electricity? He closed the entry and reopened it, determined to find something he'd missed. But again, all he saw was a pair of jagged lightning bolts arching and branching like a spider's web. Shi Feng shook his head in disbelief. Could this solitary image really embody the legendary 3,000 Thunders? If so, he couldn't understand how to put it into practice, or where all those promised variations had gone. Frustrated, he glanced toward the other technique, Lightning Fist, hoping it might offer more clarity. Shi Feng blinked, coming fully out of his daze after a long moment. A wry smile tugged at his lips. This so-called agility the system promised was more of a puzzle than a gift. Without a proper cultivation method, how was he supposed to master the 3,000 Thunders technique? Frustration welled in his chest, and he shook his head. He'd shelve that idea for now. He turned back to the Lightning Fist manual, silently hoping it wouldn't pull another Sangqian Leidong stunt on him, teaching him some inscrutable secret just to watch him fail. The name Lightning Fist sounded ordinary, almost humble, yet Shi Feng couldn't suppress a flicker of anticipation. Carefully, he opened the manual. The description leapt off the page. The Lightning Fist moves with the speed of a thunderbolt, its brilliance rivaling the noonday sun. Overflowing with blazing yang energy, each strike unleashes unparalleled power. As he read, the sequence of stances and strikes formed a clear image in his mind. Relief washed over him. This boxing technique was actually something he could work with. Chapter 27, The Terrifying Fist, Pure Practice. Shi Feng paused the holographic replay and stared at the glowing figure on the crude training stage. The practitioner was enveloped in a soft golden radiance, simply shifting through a handful of basic boxing stances. Nothing flashy, no intricate footwork, no exotic hand seals. That was it? He frowned. The technique's name, Terrifying Fist, sounded dramatic, yet the moves looked painfully ordinary. Could the system really be rewarding him with a run-of-the-mill punching style? He recalled the other system gifts he'd claimed. Each demanded a steep toll, but every one had proven astonishingly potent. There had to be more to this, some hidden secret buried beneath those unassuming forms. Shrugging off his doubts, Shi Feng decided to delay any judgment. Night was falling, and the rooftop offered him the perfect, uninterrupted training ground. After locking his door, he slipped up the narrow stairwell and emerged onto the flat tiles bathed in moonlight. He inhaled deeply, drawing on the lunar essence held within his recently acquired spirit ring. Immediately, the stubborn bottleneck that had choked his cultivation for weeks shattered. His body relaxed, his meridians cleared, and for a blissful moment he felt as though he'd become translucent, nothing more than will and moonbeam. This nightly ritual was his favorite. No distractions, no need for rest, just the steady glow of the heavens guiding him. He settled into a low stance and slowly worked through the Terrifying Fist sequence. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Each motion, though unadorned, carried a subtle depth. He focused on aligning his chi, letting lunar essence weave through his arms and legs like liquid silver. At first, the routine felt almost trivial, yet as he repeated it, the simplicity became its strength. His punches grew crisper, the air around his fists began to hum. Emboldened, he unleashed a full-power strike on a nearby stone pillar. The impact rang out, and a spiderweb crack split the column. His heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary boxing style. Breathing steadily, Shi Feng continued under the moon's calm witness, every movement more refined, every blow more soul-shaking than the last. He sensed that within these deceptively plain techniques lay a power fierce enough to justify its fearsome name. And as the night deepened, so did his mastery of the terrifying fist. Early the next morning, after breakfast, Shi Feng wrapped up his 2.5 months of daily running drills and turned his attention to the boxing and footwork routines the system had unlocked. In the quiet of his courtyard, he set aside the Thousand Storm Thunder technique, a legendary manual he'd been poring over, and instead focused on the deceptively simple boxing form that lay before him. He watched the demonstration in his mind's eye a few times, then began to practice the stance, the weight shifts, and the punch sequences. His memory was sharp. After half a dozen repetitions, he had the entire routine committed to muscle and mind. With a single, powerful swing of his fist, he tested the form's force, feeling raw potential surge through his arm. Old Jack, reclining in a nearby chair, let out a hearty whoop and slapped his hands together in encouragement. Shi Feng repeated the sequence twice more, each punch landing with solid impact. Yet as he prepared for a fourth strike, he paused. Something didn't feel right. He slowed his breathing and studied the form. Despite the speed and precision of his punches, there was no thunderous roar behind them, no overwhelming presence or hidden power. It felt more like a well-choreographed exercise routine than a fearsome martial art. Even his own style, honed through months of training, seemed to drain away the moment he applied it. Frowning, Shi Feng unleashed 10 more punches in rapid succession, searching for that elusive spark. But with each blow, the same disappointment settled over him. There was no secret technique here, no concealed might waiting to be unlocked. He straightened, gloved fists lowering to his sides, and muttered to himself, "What level of boxing is this, anyway?" His confidence undisturbed, Shi Feng resolved to dig deeper. There had to be more to this form than met the eye. Shi Feng paused, convinced he must have misremembered something. He scrolled back through the sequence, scrutinizing every frame, and then he saw it. In this playback, the sparring figure's stance subtly shifted, and dozens of tiny points of light began to pulse across its silhouette. One by one, the lights linked together with delicate beams, tracing an intricate route. A spark of understanding flared in Shi Feng's mind. So that's the exact path to follow, and it carries its own latent power. Suddenly, the once simple boxing drill took on an air of mystery and potential. Even after he closed the system interface, the revelation hung in his thoughts. He ran the newly discovered route through his mind until he was confident he'd memorized every angle and connection. Then, without warning, he thrust his fist into the empty space before him, the opening move of the lightning fist technique. Before, practicing this punch had felt no different than a standard jab. But this time was different. The instant his knuckles sliced through the air, crackling blue arcs of electricity coiled around his arm. A fierce surge of force shot from his fist, and Shi Feng felt power unlike anything he'd ever tasted. Shi Feng barely registered the sudden rush of power in his fist before it jerked him forward like a puppet on a string. Before he could react, the unseen force vanished, and he went tumbling to the ground, face first into the dust. "Ha! Now that's something you don't see every day," old Jack chuckled from his recliner. He'd been watching Shi Feng's feverish punching practice with mild curiosity, but this spectacular wipeout had him in stitches. "Feng, soul masters each develop their own unique abilities. What kind of skill are you trying to master by just flailing your fist around? I've never heard of anyone getting stronger that way." Shi Feng lay on the ground, cheeks smeared with dirt, his head spinning. After a moment, he pushed himself to his feet, eyes locked on his own fist as if it had transformed into something alien. What on earth had just happened? His fist had literally dragged him across the floor, too strange to be a mere hallucination. A troubling thought settled in his mind. Could this mysterious force be the latent power of the lightning fist skill finally awakening? As Shi Feng flexed his knuckles, he braced himself for whatever revelation or calamity was about to follow. Shi Feng grinned at his own cleverness, his excitement renewed. He swelled his chest with pride, squared his shoulders, and prepared for another attempt. Old Jack, settled comfortably in his recliner, just shook his head and rocked gently, amused by the spectacle. What came next was a series of increasingly bizarre and embarrassing moments. Every time Shi Feng threw a punch, an invisible force met his fist head-on, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling onto his back. Undeterred, he tried a kick, but his leg seemed to have a mind of its own. It jerked awkwardly, and before he knew it, he was straddling his legs in a painful split, wincing at the sharp sting in his groin. Old Jack couldn't help but chuckle. Shi Feng lay there for a moment, blinking up at the ceiling, wondering how a simple training drill had turned into such a slapstick routine. Determined not to be beaten, especially by some unseen resistance, he hauled himself to his feet, dusted off his pride, and squared up for another round. Shi Feng's fists pounded against the training hall wall, and each time he unleashed too much force, the plaster cracked and chunks of brick tumbled to the floor. He winced at the damage, shame flared in his cheeks, but it was quickly swallowed by a rush of excitement. This boxing technique was astonishing. With every strike, a surge of energy pulsed through his arms, his movements became faster, sharper. It felt as if the art itself were guiding him, rather than the other way around. Old Jack could take it no longer. He stomped forward, voice booming across the room. "Shi Feng, enough already. Look at this wall. You've shattered it. What are you made of, iron?" Heat crept up Shi Feng's neck as he stared at the web of fractures and the debris at his feet. Embarrassed as he was, he couldn't hide the smile tugging at his lips. This technique wasn't just powerful, it was revolutionary. Once mastered, his strength would multiply many times over. A thought struck him. If the lightning fist could transform him so dramatically, what might the legendary 3,000 Thunders do? His pulse quickened at the prospect. One day soon, he vowed, he would unleash that power as well. Shi Feng called back over his shoulder, "Grandpa, I'm heading out to play," then leapt to his feet, ignoring the dust clinging to his practice clothes. Without bothering to wipe away the particles, he strode toward the riverbank's no man's land, a quiet stretch of sand and boulders where he could train in peace. At the water's edge, Shi Feng studied the 3,000 Thunders diagram etched into his memory, their jagged arcs of lightning forever dancing in his mind. He stood motionless for a long moment, letting the concept sink in, then dove into practice with unbridled enthusiasm. Lightning, he reminded himself, was agile and unpredictable. In combat, it could lash out at any angle, bend reality, and confound an opponent who couldn't anticipate its path. His first attempts were chaotic. As he focused on channeling the lightning's energy through his limbs, his body lunged forward with blinding speed, then, without warning, snapped sideways in mid-stride. He nearly tore through the air in a 180-degree spin, the world whirling past his vision as if he'd been struck by a bolt himself. Far from being frightened, Shi Feng's heart soared. In that sudden, uncontrollable pivot, he'd glimpsed the true power of the 3,000 Thunders, the ability to alter one's trajectory at an impossibly sharp angle under any circumstance. Breathing hard, Shi Feng landed solidly on the sand. A wide grin spread across his face. The 3,000 Thunders technique wasn't merely a more powerful version of the lightning fist. It was something wholly unexpected, something that defied conventional logic. And now that he'd tasted its potential, there was no turning back. Chapter 28. A brutal lesson for Tang San. Feng's first foray into truly pushing his limits was nothing short of spectacular. One moment he was blazing down a forest path, the next he barreled through saplings, smashed into a tree, and hurtled straight into the river. Yet even under the icy water, his speed carried him skimming across a series of churning rapids for several meters before he finally slowed. So absorbed was he in testing this newfound power that he didn't even return home to cook until noon. He could feel the strange, crackling energy of the 3,000 Thunder domain coursing through his veins, but he still hadn't grasped the full scale of the speed it granted. No matter, his base velocity had never been lacking. All that remained was to push harder, to go faster. A wicked grin tugged at the corner of his mouth as he whispered into the empty woods. "Give me a few days, Tang San. When I'm done, you'll be the one begging your parents for mercy." For over 2 months, old Jack had been trying to coax Shi Feng into joining the Soul Hall's rigorous training program, but each time he'd been met with a flat refusal. Frustrated, Jack eventually scoured the neighboring villages until he secured a MEMPL work-study placement for his protege. Still, Shi Feng insisted on following his own plan. Team up with Tang San, bide their time, and pursue the path to godhood when the moment was right. 10 years, 20 years, however long it took. Above all else, he had to protect his freedom. If he signed on with the Soul Hall now, would Tang Hao ever let him go? Determined, Shi Feng flexed his fingers around the hilt of his blade. Idle talk was over. The time for action had come, and when he met Tang San again, he'd show him exactly what speed really meant. Shi Feng shook his head. Join the Spirit Hall? Impossible. Even if Tang Hao decided to spare his life, he'd likely have Shi Feng arrested on the spot and thrown into that notorious black cell. There was simply no way he could ever enter the hall. Unless... No, that was just wishful thinking. 3 days slipped by, and only 1 day remained before their departure for Notting City. Early that morning, Shi Feng sensed that Tang San's mountain seclusion was drawing to a close. Determined to settle the score, he set off up the rugged path. With tomorrow's journey looming, Shi Feng wanted, above all else, to defeat Tang San outright, to erase the humiliation he'd suffered the last time they met. Since surviving the catastrophe, Shi Feng had avoided Tang San's home entirely. Instead, he'd poured every waking hour into mastering that odd boxing style and its accompanying body techniques. Day after day, he drilled the strange punch until, after 3 grueling sessions, he could finally control it without collapsing mid-strike. The Sangqian Leidong's lightning-fast spins and sudden shifts had nearly left him battered beyond belief, but bit by bit, he was beginning to unravel its secrets. Shi Feng eased off just enough to maintain full control over his trajectory. In his experience, that slight reduction wouldn't compromise his agility. After all, the Thousand Thunder Surge had no fixed footwork. Once you grasped its core, you could redirect your entire body at will. That kind of flexibility should be more than enough to evade Tang San's ghost shadow technique. Within minutes, he'd reached the mountain's summit, arriving just as Tang San concluded his training. Tang San's greatest fear was exposure. No one, not even his own father, was meant to know the true depth of his cultivation. Shi Feng's sudden appearance made him tense. His Xidian demon eyes and profound heaven fist were secrets he'd killed to protect. Then Tang San realized that Shi Feng must have climbed up after he'd already finished. He relaxed fractionally. Evidently, Shi Feng had seen nothing incriminating. Still, the young man kept his guard up. "You're here so early," Tang San said coolly. "Don't tell me you've come to defile this place again?" He couldn't shake the memory. Last time Shi Feng had slipped up the mountain at dawn, his power had nearly withered the entire summit. Tang San remembered it all too well. Shi Feng grinned, flashing a set of bright white teeth. "Last time you beat me. I want a rematch." Tang San glanced him over, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Oh, you sure about that?" His tone dripped with contempt, and Shi Feng felt his jaw tighten. "This time I'll beat you so badly you'll be crying for mercy." Tang San frowned, surprised by the confident aura radiating from Shi Feng. He'd never seen him this composed. "All right," he said, unconcerned. "Let's see how much you've improved. Just don't crawl off and beg me to stop when you lose." "You'll be more than satisfied," Shi Feng replied coolly. Before the words had fully left his mouth, he'd already dashed forward, closing the gap between them in a heartbeat. Tang San shook his head, summoning the Ghost Shadow maneuver. "You can't tag me with raw speed alone. You need skill to outwit me." But before he could finish, a sudden, crushing impact struck him from behind, and Tang San went flying through the air. "What's the matter?" Shi Feng tilted his head, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half-smile. Tang San hovered a moment in midair, channeling internal force at his waist to steady himself. The moment his feet touched the ground, though the impact drove all the power back into his legs, and he staggered 3 steps before finally catching himself. How? How did you catch up with me?" Tang San's voice was thick with disbelief as he pressed a hand to his bruised hip. The kick Shi Feng had delivered still burned. Nothing's impossible. Want another one? Shi Feng called over his shoulder, striding forward with casual confidence. Tang San's pride flared. He'd spent 2 lifetimes honing his skills, and at well over 30 in both lives, he refused to be outmatched by a mere youth. If he couldn't handle Shi Feng now, all those years of training would be for nothing. Determined to prove himself, Tang San let loose a dazzling array of ghost-step footwork. His movements blurred, creating multiple after-images that danced across the mountaintop as he launched a flurry of lightning-fast kicks. To his horror, Shi Feng flowed through each strike as if reading Tang San's mind. He matched every feint, parry, and thrust with effortless precision, closing the distance between them with uncanny ease. Tang San's confident grin faltered as he realized this confrontation was far from the decisive win he'd expected. Shi Feng watched Tang San circle him with a faint smile. "All that fancy footwork isn't doing you any favors," he said lightly, then sprang forward and drove a sharp kick into Tang San's backside. Tang San's eyes widened in surprise. He felt the blow through his core, stumbled into the air, and landed with barely a breath to spare. Shi Feng was already there, waiting. Seeing Tang San collapsing toward him, Shi Feng's grin widened. He coiled like a spring and let his fist fly. "Crane controls the dragon! Catch!" Tang San shouted, twisting his arm to deflect the blow. Shi Feng's punch glanced off, and he stumbled, but only for a heartbeat before he shifted his weight and veered away. Tang San landed perfectly upright and whipped his gaze back to Shi Feng. His heart was pounding. In raw, straight-line speed, he had never encountered anyone faster than Shi Feng. Yet what truly unnerved him was the unrivaled body technique at Shi Feng's command, the legendary ghost step of the Tang sect. For centuries, it had been refined to dodge hidden weapons in midair, to evade any attack, and now Tang San was helplessly trying to outrun a boy barely 6 years old. He took a deep breath, centering himself. The next exchange would decide everything. But as he met Shi Feng's calm, unshakable stare, Tang San knew he would have to push every ounce of his skill to its limit if he hoped to land a single blow. During the chase just now, Tang San realized something extraordinary. Shi Feng wasn't using any flashy movement techniques or intricate footwork, only brutally simple pivots. No matter how carefully Tang San tried to predict his steps, Shi Feng would whip around in an instant, exploiting the shortest possible turning radius to keep just out of reach. Tang San could hardly believe a human body could withstand such violent, high-speed angle changes. Wouldn't the waist, or the knees, give out? Yet Shi Feng did it effortlessly. What Tang San didn't know was that Shi Feng had endured countless trials to develop this method, what he called the rough turn. It had taken him years to strengthen his joints, refine his balance, and harden his core, and even now it was only partly mastered. "How are you doing that?" Tang San finally blurted out, breathless. Shi Feng offered a casual chuckle. He didn't hesitate or blush. Seeing Tang San's astonishment stirred a quiet pride in him. "It's a movement technique I created myself." That smile only fueled Tang San's irritation. He scowled. "Fine, let's see how well you vanish from my sight." With a fierce cry, Tang San launched himself back into the chase. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get close. After several minutes of frantic pursuit, he came to a panting halt, utterly defeated. Chapter 29, To Nodding City. 6-year-old Shi Feng was simply too unpredictable. He zigzagged across the clearing at will, kicking up dust under Tang San's feet, yet never once brushed against the older boy's robe. Finally, Shi Feng stopped, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. "All right, let's settle this with a fistfight. You can't run away now." 10 minutes later, Tang San lay on his back in the dirt, his nose bleeding, cheeks swollen, eyes glazed with disbelief. The most talented disciple the Tang sect had produced in 100 years had just been bested by a 6-year-old child, and with a face like that, there was no way Tang San could return home without embarrassment. Shi Feng gave a satisfied chuckle as he dusted off his tiny sleeves. The thrill of victory still lingered, but now that it was over, relief washed over him. "I'm heading back," he called cheerfully. "You'd better get home too. Your father's waiting for you to breakfast." And with that, he bounded down the mountain path, humming to himself, leaving Tang San crumpled and bruised in the clearing. Half an hour later, Tang San finally dragged himself through the door at home. His face was a patchwork of purples and blues. Even the sockets around his eyes had darkened into ugly crescents. He stared at his reflection in the hallway mirror, dreading the questions and scolding that awaited him. Shi Feng's attacks were brutal, Tang San muttered, pressing a trembling hand to his swollen lip as a sharp breath escaped him. In such close-quarters combat, he'd never even had the chance to draw a hidden blade. Once his speed advantage disappeared, he stood no chance against Shi Feng's overwhelming strength. After only a few blows, a strange, numbing force had him seeing stars. He'd attempted to use his internal kung fu to mend the worst of his injuries, but the relief was minimal. Defeated, he had no choice but to retreat home. "Dad, get up and come eat breakfast," Tang San called hoarsely, wincing as he gingerly touched the bruise forming on his cheek. From the inner room came a sleepy yawn as Tang Hao emerged, rubbing his eyes. He stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of his son's battered face, swollen lips, a blackened nose, and a ghost of fresh cuts. Shi Feng's scarlet bruise was hard to miss. Tang Hao set down his spoon and frowned. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Tang San's eyes darted away. "It's nothing. I just tripped," he mumbled, forcing a crooked smile. Tang Hao took a deliberate sip of porridge, then shook his head. The dark bruise beneath Tang San's eye looked more like a punch than a fall. "Did someone hit you?" Tang San swallowed. After a moment's hesitation, he muttered, "Shi Feng." Tang Hao paused, then finished his porridge in 3 decisive gulps. Setting the bowl aside, he met his son's gaze. "Losing a fight isn't disgraceful. You'll get him next time." He leaned back in his chair, a distant look in his eyes. "When I was your age, I was the Clear Sky School's child prodigy. Nobody in my generation ever bested me. I never thought I'd see one of my own children beaten by a peer. But if it's that Shi Feng, well, he is remarkable. Incredible strength for his age, and already boasting his first spirit ring. No wonder you struggled." Tang San's shoulders slumped, but relief flickered across his face at his father's words. If even Tang Hao respected Shi Feng's skill, there might yet be hope for a rematch. Tang San blinked in surprise when he heard Tang Hao's gentle tone. He'd been expecting a scolding. "Understood, Dad," he said, nodding. He vowed to himself, "Next time, I'll track that place down, use the hidden weapon, and never let him get close again." Tang Hao shook his head with a sigh. "No forging today. Pack your things, rest up, and head to school tomorrow." With that, he ducked into the bedroom to catch up on sleep. Standing in the hallway, Tang San felt an odd wave of sadness wash over him as his father's footsteps receded. The next morning, Shi Feng rose at dawn and prepared breakfast. Once they'd eaten, he and old Jack set out for Tang San's house. Since they planned to enter the city today, old Jack donned a brand new suit and looked exceptionally spry. At his insistence, Shi Feng also changed into fresh clothes. "Xiaoxue, let's go. Your lazy father won't even bother to see you off," old Jack called as they stepped inside. Tang San huffed in annoyance, grabbed a piece of charcoal, and hastily scrawled a few words on the threshold. Then, shouldering his pack, he trudged out to join them. Old Jack eyed Tang San's bruised cheek with concern. "What happened to you, boy?" Tang San shot a quick look at Shi Feng, then shrugged. "Nothing serious, just tripped." Old Jack shook his head disapprovingly. "You need to be more careful. Come on, we'd better get moving." Right. Through the open window, Tang Hao watched the trio's retreating figures and felt a tug at his heart. On the floor lay his son's farewell note. "Dad, I'm off. Please take care of your health and don't overdo the wine. There's porridge in the pot. Don't forget to eat." Reading it, Tang Hao's eyes grew misty. He couldn't help but smile, even as a lump formed in his throat. Outside, the old tutor and the 2 boys set off along the dusty road toward Nodding City. The morning sun was warm, and with each step, Tang San felt the sting of parting soften. Beside him, Shi Feng strode confidently, just as eager to reach the academy. Both boys brimmed with anticipation. Tang San was fascinated by tales of soul masters. Shi Feng, having watched Douluo not long ago, was already familiar with the legends old Jack spoke of. As they walked, Tang San peppered old Jack with questions. How did one cultivate a spirit? What trials awaited them at the academy? Shi Feng listened thoughtfully, occasionally chiming in with observations from his own readings. Behind them, the city gates of Tang village receded into the distance, and ahead lay the promise of a new life, one filled with mystery, power, and the boundless potential of the soul. Grandpa Jack looked at the two young men beside him and spoke earnestly. Xiao San, Xiao Chen, you're both from the countryside. Once you're at the academy, you must study hard. Don't give anyone a chance to look down on you, understand. Understood, Grandpa, they answered in unison. Jack's eyes settled on Shi Feng, formerly Jiang Chen. Especially you, Shi Feng. You've got greater talent than Xiao San. Look out for him at the academy, and don't let anyone bully him. Do you hear me? Shi Feng forced a smile. With Tang San's abilities, he'd never dreamed anyone could push him around. Don't worry, Grandpa. Nobody's going to bully Xiao San. Satisfied, Grandpa Jack nodded and scanned the horizon. The soaring stone walls of Nodding City were now in view. We've arrived, he announced. Tang San and Shi Feng stared up at the ramparts in awe. It was their first time in Nodding City, and the sight of its towering walls filled them with excitement and just a hint of nervousness. As they presented their papers at the gate, the guards inspected them briefly and waved them through. Once inside, the three made their way westward. In the heart of Nodding City's sprawling western quarter stood the prestigious Nodding Junior Soul Master Academy, its ivory towers gleaming in the midday sun. Shi Feng's heart skipped a beat as they drew near. He clenched his fists and felt a familiar, fierce resolve ignite within him. Maxiu Nuo hadn't expected him to survive, and now Shi Feng intended to prove that he'd returned stronger than ever. A cold determination settled over him. Here, in the very place that would shape his future, he would claim his due at last. After asking for directions several times, old Jack finally led his two children to the academy's entrance. Though Nodding College was merely a junior college in a small city, its grand scale was evident the moment they arrived. The gate spanned 20 meters in width and soared 10 meters high, hewn from solid granite. Its twin doors, 20 meters across, were forged from refined iron, their dark sheen catching the sunlight. Beyond the gate, tall trees lined the path, and the faint outlines of majestic buildings hinted at the beauty within. Above the entrance, 4 imposing characters declared it plainly, Nodding College. Shi Feng's eyes narrowed as he picked up a familiar aura emanating from within Nodding College. It was Jing Wuming's signature presence. Could an assassin organization really be hiding inside these hallowed halls? He scoured Jing Wuming's recent memories for any sign of foul play, but found nothing. Over 2 months had passed since Jing Wuming ascended to his current level, and by now he should have claimed his second soul ring and solidified his rank as a great soul master. The thought made Shi Feng's lips quirk into a smile. College life here might be far more entertaining than he'd expected. Grasping that Jing Wuming was inside, yet certain his friend could not sense his arrival, Shi Feng followed old Jack toward the ornate main gates. No sooner had they reached the entrance than a young gatekeeper stepped forward, blocking their path. He sneered down at them as if they were nothing more than provincial riffraff. What are you doing here? This is Nodding College, not some backwater town where you country bumpkins belong. Old Jack immediately leaned in and whispered a plea, his tone urgent, but the gatekeeper's contempt only grew. He straightened, eyes blazing with arrogance at the thought of having 2 outsiders to boss around, and perhaps milk for a little extra profit. It was a scene Shi Feng had seen play out countless times before, the proud gatekeeper, the timid intermediary, and the outsider, desperate for entry. With a subtle frown, Shi Feng braced himself. This encounter would be the first of many tests he'd face on his path through Nodding College, tests he fully intended to pass. Chapter 30. Are you sure your theory is invincible? Shi Feng barely registered the concierge's words earlier. He'd been lost in a book, studying ancient soul art illustrations, and paid little attention to the room around him. Now, staring at the young man's sneering face, anger flared inside him. Any moment now his master would surely arrive, he thought, glancing anxiously toward the doorway. He looked back again and again, but there was still no sign of the master. Meanwhile, the concierge's voice rose in scorn. Blue-silver grass brimming with innate soul power? Ha! You've got to be kidding! A zombie martial soul. What, some lifeless corpse? Ha! This is priceless. With a disdainful laugh, the young man tossed Shi Feng's and Tang San's martial soul certificates onto the dirt-strewn floor. Holy Soul Village? More like Beggar Village. That name suits your sorry looks much better, he sneered. He dropped hints earlier about the certificate's value, but old Jack, eager for a quick profit, had taken them at face value. Now, hearing his home village insulted so brazenly, old Jack's face burned red with fury as he clenched his fists. Old Jack's bent frame snapped upright in an instant. "What did you say?" he barked, eyes blazing. Holy Soul Village was his pride and his honor, and he wouldn't stand by while anyone belittled it. The young man sneered. "Insult you? Come on, hit me. Prove how brave you are. Go ahead, swing at an old man just to protect your precious water tank." With that, he thrust out his palm, aiming a solid shove at old Jack's chest, enough to send the elder sprawling. Tang San and Shi Feng lunged forward simultaneously, both furious at the insult. But Shi Feng was quicker. He caught the youth's wrist in a vice-like grip before the blow could land. Tang San stepped back, watching with a grim smile. He knew his friend had the situation under control. Shi Feng lowered his stance and yanked the young man's arm down so forcefully that the boy's shoulder nearly dislocated. Pain radiated in a sharp burst, and he staggered, mouth open in a silent scream. "You little devil," the youth snarled, glaring at Shi Feng with burning hatred. "You're asking for death tonight." "Enough!" A deep, commanding voice rang out from behind. The young man's scowl vanished instantly, replaced by a nervous smile. "Master!" He stammered, and before he could steady himself, he lurched backward and slammed into the iron gate. Shi Feng turned, ed to see a man in his late 50s approaching. He looked entirely ordinary, plain features, modest clothes, but there was an unmistakable air of authority about him. This must be the master, Shi Feng realized. The man accepted the enrollment certificates from old Jack, gave Shi Feng and Tang San a brief once-over, then said, "Old Jack, leave these two boys with me. I'll take them in to register." Old Jack sighed with relief. "Thank you, master. You must keep an eye on them at the academy. I'll come back to fetch them once the semester ends." Shi Feng, "Look after Tang San, all right?" "We will," Shi Feng and Tang San replied in unison. Old Jack finally allowed himself a satisfied smile and waved them off. The middle-aged nobleman tilted his head and gave the attendant a cool look. "This is your final warning, if—" Suddenly his words died on his lips. A spreading shadow, gray-black and viscous, was crawling up the young man's neck, blotching his skin until it cloaked his entire face. The youth sat rigid as a board, utterly paralyzed and voiceless. Only his wide, terrified eyes rolled wildly in their sockets. The nobleman's expression snapped from annoyance to alarm. "Young man, what have you?" Before he could finish, Shi Feng stepped forward. In one swift motion, he grasped the poisoned youth's hand and drew the corpse toxin out with practiced ease. Earlier, in a fit of rage, someone had administered a small but debilitating dose of this rare, necrotizing poison. It wasn't enough to kill him outright, but it would have consigned him to bed for months. Even now, with the toxin purged, the damage to his vital functions was severe. He would not recover within a single lunar cycle. As the dark modeling retreated, the boy's face turned deathly white, so pale it might have been carved from marble. He stared at Shi Feng, eyes wide with panic, and shrank back against the chair, his limbs trembling. Shi Feng exchanged a quick, measured glance with the nobleman. Whatever had just transpired, it was only the beginning. Yu Xiaogang, the middle-aged man, tugged Tang San gently by the hand, all the while studying Shi Feng with a look of genuine surprise, as if he'd just discovered something entirely new. "Come on in," he said with a friendly smile, easing Tang San forward. Shi Feng followed, already certain that this must be Master Yu Xiaogang. Shi Feng couldn't pretend to admire this so-called grandmaster. His own cultivation had long since outstripped Yu Xiaogang's theories, and with the system at his disposal, he saw no reason to fawn over someone who could offer him nothing meaningful. Besides, the Grandmaster's emotional timidity irked him. "You two may call me Grandmaster," the elder said with an easy smile. "That's what everyone calls me." Then, without warning, he exposed the secret of Tang San's dual spirits. Tang San's eyes went wide. He'd been on the verge of slipping away. After all, only he and his father knew about his hidden second spirit. At the sight of Tang San's panic, Shi Feng suppressed a grimace. It would be laughable if the Grandmaster's next gesture accidentally set off a spirit sleeve arrow. Calmly, the Grandmaster unfolded his argument. Drawing on years of research in the 10 core competencies of the martial soul, he marshaled theory after theory until, beyond doubt, he proved that Tang San truly harbored twin spirits. Tang San's face grew solemn. He stepped back, then, eyes brimming with awe, dropped to his knees and kowtowed 3 times. "Master," he whispered, voice trembling with reverence, "please accept me as your disciple." Master Luo swiftly hoisted Shi Feng to his feet. "Why are you still kowtowing, you silly boy? I'm your teacher, not your parent." Tang San, standing nearby, raised his head and declared solemnly, "Teacher for 1 day, father for a lifetime." A flicker of pride crossed Master Luo's face before he broke into hearty laughter. "Excellent, just as I suspected." He turned his sharp gaze from Tang San to Shi Feng. Though Tang San's twin martial souls were impressive, it was Shi Feng who truly fascinated him, an unusually full reserve of soul power, a rare zombie-type martial soul, and that astonishing display of poison mastery. As a self-professed research fanatic with countless theoretical tomes at his fingertips, how could he resist something so novel? Leaning forward, Master Luo fixed Shi Feng with an expectant smile. "You're Shi Feng, aren't you? Tell me, will you take me as your teacher?" He'd already swept Tang San off his feet with his profound theories. Now he was confident this young man, too, would be unable to resist such knowledge. Shi Feng shook his head. The master's theories were undoubtedly profound, but they were tailored for ordinary disciples, ordinary people who lacked Shi Feng's unique system and insight. Besides, why bind himself to an apprenticeship? "Thank you for your offer, Master," he said with measured respect, "but I have no intention of formally taking a mentor. I'll continue my cultivation on my own." The Master stared at him in genuine surprise. He had never encountered such a steadfast refusal. Was this youth truly blind to the value of his teachings? Tang San, standing nearby, quickly interceded. "Master, Shi Feng's talent is undeniable. With your guidance, he could reach heights no one else can. Please, consider taking him as your disciple." The Master frowned, then turned back to Shi Feng. "Young man, in our academy it's customary for promising students to choose a mentor, and I rank second among all schools. I accept disciples only on rare occasions, yet your aptitude compels me. I would hate for you to miss this chance to grow." Shi Feng remained calm, though his resolve was firm. He inclined his head in a polite bow. "I truly appreciate your confidence in me, Master, but I am satisfied cultivating by myself." With that, he quietly stepped away, leaving master and disciple alike in stunned silence. Chapter 31. Young people, learn self-control. If you regret it later, it'll be too late. The master's voice was calm but firm as he fixed Shi Feng with a steady gaze. He'd laid out his theory so plainly that even someone of modest wit should understand. Shi Feng simply shook his head, though a faint smile curled his lips. "Master," he said, "are you absolutely certain your theory is flawless?" For a heartbeat, the master stared at him, surprised by the question. Then he nodded without hesitation. "Everyone says my theory is unbeatable. I won't claim it's perfect, but I firmly believe there's not a single instructor in this academy who can match me." Confidence radiated from the master, infecting Tang San, who stood by his side with the same assured conviction. Yet Shi Feng raised an eyebrow. "But what if your theory doesn't apply to me?" "Impossible," the master replied, waving the idea away. "My research spans an immense scope. I've studied nearly a century's worth of cases. The data are authoritative, and my 10 core competencies of Wuhan cannot be wrong." Shi Feng regarded him coolly for a moment, then leaned forward. "Very well. Let me ask you this. How long does a soul master have to absorb their first soul ring?" The question hung in the air, and even the confident master found himself at a rare loss for words. The old master blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected such a technical question from Shi Feng, and his opinion of the young disciple shifted on the spot. "Based on nearly a century's worth of case studies," he said confidently, "a first-level soul master can absorb no more than 4 spirit rings, and each of those rings can be at most 3 years old." Shi Feng's lips curved into a challenge. "All right, let's make a wager. If I prove your theory wrong, I'll drop the idea of asking you to be my teacher. Agreed?" The master's eyes gleamed with interest. "Agreed," he replied without hesitation. This promising disciple, he would indeed accept him. Shi Feng took 2 steps back and raised his hand. Then watch closely. At his command, a violet spirit ring rose up from the ground beneath his feet. It hovered for a moment, then gently settled around his arm. The master stared, mouth agape. How is this possible? He gasped. Nearby, Tang San's eyes widened just as much. He stared at the rare purple ring circling Shi Feng's arm, utterly astonished. He still didn't fully understand its significance. Had he known, his shock would have rivaled even the master's. Shi Feng slid the spirit ring back onto his finger and met the Grandmaster's stunned gaze with a faint, confident smile. "So it seems I no longer need to recognize you as my teacher," he said coolly. "And not just this ring. Every spirit ring I earn from now on, I'm sure I'll outstrip what you've called the limit." Even Tang San glanced at the Grandmaster with a new, intrigued expression. Before the elder could collect himself, he sprang forward, seizing Shi Feng by the shoulders and shaking him. "How did you do it? Tell me, right now." Shi Feng winced at the frantic energy radiating from the Grandmaster. Things were only getting more tangled. He cleared his throat uneasily. It just sort of happened." The Grandmaster froze, confusion overtaking his earlier excitement, and instantly released Shi Feng's shoulders. He stepped back, straightened his robes, and ruffled his beard. "Very well. Come with me. We'll report this to the Academic Affairs Office at once." Without another word, the elder led the way down the corridor, his pace brisk, leaving Tang San and the others exchanging puzzled looks as they hurried to keep up. Shi Feng stood silently as the master walked away, replaying in his mind the wager they'd just made. He knew how reluctant the master was to take on a new disciple. After all, Shi Feng had earned his first soul ring from a 1,000-year spirit beast, a feat that left the master's own 3 years of arduous study in the dust. Frankly, the man wondered if Shi Feng was even human. When the master resumed his stride, Shi Feng caught the worried look in Tang San's eyes and reached back to grab his hand. "Come on," he urged. "What are you waiting for? You're not second-guessing this, are you?" Tang San hesitated, his steps faltering. Then, as if steeling himself, he squared his shoulders and declared, "A teacher for 1 day is a father for life." At that, the master allowed himself a pleased smile and quickened his pace. Shi Feng shook his head, amused by Tang San's earnestness. Old-fashioned as the boy was, the master truly was the pillar of Tang San's growth, and Shi Feng sincerely hoped that Tang San would formally become his disciple. He nudged Tang San with a grin. "Honestly, I don't think the master's methods are flawed. My problem is that I'm the weird one here. I'm probably the only person in the world who can pull off what I just did." Tang San glanced sidelong at Shi Feng and couldn't help thinking, he's never been normal. Ever since childhood, Shi Feng has been, well, a little twisted. The thought oddly comforted him. "I'm still curious," Tang San said after a moment. "What about your spirit ring? You said you could only gain one by killing a spirit beast. When did you manage to do that?" Shi Feng just grinned and shook his head. "Not telling you. Best to keep it a secret." With that, their instructor led them to the Academic Affairs Office and bid them farewell. The moment he left, a few clerks who'd overheard that Tang San's teacher was a spirit master couldn't hide their smug amusement. Shi Feng, who had no connection to Tang San's background, remained aloof, barely sparing them a glance. After completing the enrollment formalities, the two set off toward the dormitory complex. Halfway there, Shi Feng suddenly halted. "Little San," he said, using Tang San's nickname, "you go on ahead to the dorms. I've got something I need to take care of." Tang San frowned in surprise. "What's up? This is our first time here. What could be wrong?" Shi Feng offered nothing more than a mischievous half-smile. "Just follow me later. I'll find you once I'm done." Though puzzled, Tang San nodded and pressed on toward the dormitories, wondering what Shi Feng might be up to. "Don't worry, I'll be there later." Tang San offered a curt nod, asked no more questions, and headed back toward the dormitory. Shi Feng returned a faint smile, heeded the tug at his heart, and slipped into the nearby grove. He could sense Jingwuming's presence before he even passed between the trees. The instant he did, a series of sharp metallic strikes shattered the quiet air. A short distance ahead, Jingwuming stood like a living metronome, driving his sword forward again and again with unrelenting precision. Sweat drenched his training tunic. Each thrust mirrored the last in speed, height, and angle, a flawless rhythm born of tireless discipline. Shi Feng slowed his steps, letting the dry leaves crunch underfoot. In a heartbeat, Jing Wuming whirled about, his cold, steely gaze cutting through the shadows as though his eyes themselves were sharpened blades. Shi Feng recognized him immediately and let out a breath of relief. "Master," Jing Wuming greeted, surprised. "What are you doing here at Notting College?" "I've come to study," Shi Feng replied. He tilted his head. "And you? What brings you here?" Across from him, Jing Wuming, normally so reserved, sounded like any other college student. "You told me to socialize more with my peers, master, so I enrolled here." Shi Feng realized that this decision had come from his own advice. With Jing Wuming's talent, he would undoubtedly top the student ranks at Notting College. All he needed was his first soul ring to graduate from the junior division. Shi Feng patted the bench beside him. "Sit down and tell me what's been happening at Wuhun Palace." Over the past 2 months, Shi Feng had buried himself in cultivation and hadn't kept up with the palace's affairs in Notting City. Seeing his hesitation, he added, "Come on, sit." Jing Wuming obeyed at once, settling himself beside Shi Feng and preparing to report on everything that had happened in his absence. Shi Feng was reclining against a stone pillar in the courtyard when one of his junior disciples hurried in and knelt respectfully. "Master," the young man began, "the head seat at the Marshall Soul Branch Hall in Notting City has been vacant for months. They're finally ready to appoint someone." Shi Feng opened one lazy eye. "Oh? Matthew Nuo?" The disciple inclined his head. "Yes. Truthfully, the decision should have been made long ago, but the upper-level Zidian kept postponing it. They've only just found the time to handle it." "In 3 days," the disciple went on, "envoys from the Wuhun Temple will arrive in Notting City to preside over the election ceremony for the new branch hall master." Shi Feng stretched and propped his arms behind his head. "Master Machino has been the senior deacon at Notting City forever. Every other deacon was trained under him. He's the clear favorite this time." And poor Cece. She was so innocent. She honestly believed Matthew was enchanted by her, never realizing she was just a pawn in someone else's game. The disciple's face fell at the implication. Shi Feng sighed, a faraway look in his eyes. "No," he murmured, "the saddest one in all this is Brother Tao." Shi Feng leaned back in his chair and raised an eyebrow. "By the way, you've been dropping in on Matthew Nuo's office every day lately, haven't you?" Jing Wuming nodded briskly. "Yes, young master. I've made it my duty to keep a close watch on Matthew Nuo's every move." A knowing smile curved Shi Feng's lips. "And how did Matthew Nuo and Cece perform today?" Jing Wuming stiffened, then his cheeks tinted pink. "Their performance was exceptionally elegant, young master." Shi Feng stood up and gave his steward a light pat on the shoulder. "That's good to hear. But remember, lad, no matter the temptation, always keep your composure." Chapter 32. Boss Xiaowu. Here comes the newcomer,